Good morning. Good morning, Quiz. How are
Good
you?
morning. Boy, that almost put me back to sleep.
I know, but that's my lovely new intro from Counter Talk for my series Library Chats, which I thought, is Avatars Live. That's what we're doing with the congressional hearings. So,
We are.
oh, yeah. It's my spooky, like Robsky says, it's my spooky flying book, which I really enjoy.
Are you a witch?
No, I'm not. But
Okay.
yeah, no, uh, I'm an atheist. I don't know. Well, the book is I like it. I like the way it flies around the air like that. It's kind of cool.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
That was cool. That
Mm.
was a great or a great opening, great ending.
Oh,
Yeah.
they
But
did
we
so
are
much
looking
work.
forward.
Oh, we are looking forward. We are definitely looking forward. Good morning, everyone in the chat. It's so nice to see all of you. All wanting to, mm, wanting to actually see what's going to happen today. And as we've already heard, there's going to be a bit of a delay because of family emergency with the Trump 6th campaign. Was it his campaign manager,
His
Stephen?
former
Yeah,
campaign manager. Yeah.
former campaign manager. Oops, I found something else I need to do besides testify this morning, I think.
I
Well,
had a family emergency.
which I hope everything's okay if anything was going on, but still, it's rather convenient. But there are other days of the hearing that he will probably get pulled into.
Yeah, he'll be
So,
recalled. Not a problem.
hmm, I know, I know. Yeah, it's like, no, Colin, I did not. Did you drop something? I'm gonna have to go look now. So, you know, I guess what we could start with is bringing everybody up to date. If most of you may have been here for the first congressional hearing, and heard Liz Cheney's opening statements and the chairman, um, which was quite enlightening. Um, saw some of the testimony of the officer, and uh, mm, what do you think, Quiz? I mean, to me, that was I was surprised to hear how much that that our then President Trump actually knew about the misinformation he was giving out. To hear Barr testify,
You know, I
or give that little statement there about what he knew.
this had
Um,
been reported for a
mm,
while actually that
mm-hmm,
um and I think we all know that for his whole 4 years as president, Trump as president refused to take a lot of people's
mm-hmm,
information, um, much like the information coming from the intelligence community. Trump would just kind of wave his hand at it and go by what he wanted. We can't forget what Trump did with Noah. I mean,
yeah.
oh, it'll go this way and mark it in a Sharpie. It's like, okay.
Mm.
And, so yeah, Trump rarely listens to his own experts, which you have to understand that a lot of times you're not electing, I hate to say the smartest guy in the world, because you're not. I mean,
Mm-hmm,
presidents or, politicians aren't the smartest people in the world. What they
mm-hmm,
can do though is at least most of them can put their ego to the side
mm-hmm.
and rely on the experts that they choose to help run the country. I mean, that's what a
That's what
good
I always
president
thought.
does.
I always thought it was like, you never think it's one man when you're voting for politicians. You're voting for the team. You're voting for,
Right.
everyone he builds around him. And what was, I mean, I don't want to sound naive, but I'm going to sound naive because I actually thought that perhaps he was getting really good information and like people were actually trying to keep him, going on the right path and that he would at least be listening. But to hear that, yes, he did have people trying to tell him and trying to give him the correct
Hmm.
information to put out there and to stop him from putting misinformation out to the country. I mean, that's where I find the most disagreeable part of the whole
I
thing.
mean, as
Whether you
far
like the
as,
man, whether you're a Republican or a
yeah,
Democrat or an independent, whether you like him or not, um, he was the president, and I had just hoped that the information he was putting out, there was a reason for it. But to find out that it was all misinformation, and then to find out he knew it repeatedly from his own people, that he was having to gather the information, and he was, bringing closer to him to provide the information, and he refused to acknowledge it.
Of
And he
course.
just wanted to say whatever he was going to say anyway. And
Yeah.
then he just didn't care that he had that much disrespect for
Mhm.
the country and for the people.
Yeah. I
He
mean,
only cares about his group of followers. And that's dangerous. I don't care what anyone says.
of
That
course it
is
is. I mean,
extremely
you're
dangerous.
elected president of the United States, the whole United
Mm-hmm.
States and all of its territories.
Mm-hmm.
You're not elected as the Republican president. You're elected as the president. You have
Mm-hmm.
to be able to meet all peoples, not just your people, not just your family, not just to make money. Um, and we all know the whole controversy of him going into office and still holding on to his financial interests. I mean, I think there should be a law that says, when you go into office, you give up all financial controls of any companies that you're in charge of. I also think after Trump, we should have an amendment that said there will be no more social media for the president. I mean, everything will have to go
Exactly.
through an approved source from now on. Because when Trump lost his, social media accounts when they were suspended and or indefinitely removed, he flipped. He had no way to get that information out there again. And let's face it, he was the first president to use Twitter and
Mm-hmm.
Facebook and everything else to his advantage. I mean, he had an open pulpit and daily. I mean, they would say that he spent more time tweeting than he would in meetings.
Right. When we would hear that he wouldn't even read the daily briefs that were prepared for him
Hmm.
on everything going on in our own country and in foreign affairs, anywhere. Like the daily brief is put together to try to, give you a little insight into everything that's going on and what we
Right.
might be focusing on. He refused to read them. He wouldn't. He never read one.
Well,
Not one.
and that just
And
goes to show
mm-hmm.
why it isn't surprising when the experts are now coming out in an environment where they're under oath and saying, yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, he didn't take our suggestions. I mean, the man had how many? 5 chiefs of staffs in 4 years?
Yeah, you wonder. Yeah, you wonder.
They all were like, okay, I'm done.
Yeah. He gets along well with others, like he
I
really
mean, and
does,
let's face it,
Yeah.
even I don't even like the man. Even William Barr quit his staff.
Mm-hmm.
Just said no, no. And it was how close to the end. I mean, it was less than a month. And Barr says, no, I'm done.
No, I'm done. Yeah, I can't even last to the end.
I mean, which tells me that Barr at least in some way respects the Constitution. I mean, when it comes to making your choice, respect the Constitution or look after the so-called president
Mm-hmm.
who wants to become king.
Mm-hmm.
Barr's like, no, sorry, Constitution wins out with me. And I can give him his props for that. I think that was a respectable thing to do. He reached the line, at least his line. And we all, come on, everybody has their own line.
Mm-hmm.
Your line may not be as close as my line, but
Mm-hmm.
still, I have a line. And he had a line. And he walked up to that line and looked at it and said, nope, I ain't crossing that line.
Exactly.
And I think that line for him is probably written in history, where like John Dean
Mm-hmm.
and the others walked all over that freaking line.
They did, but I think that brings up a good point that everybody started to leave because they saw the lines that were being crossed, and like some of it could actually be, no, in
It
my
could be
opinion.
treason.
And I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not into these, constitution law and everything like that. We'd have to go to the experts. Like I know Uncivil is covering this also, and he'll probably have a lot to say about constitutional law and the things that we're watching unfold and the things that happened. and I can't wait to hear his take on it. Not that I want you all to leave, but definitely I would look to him for it because of his base on it. But to see this thing, to me, it just seemed like everybody was leaving because they saw him breaking the law. Like they saw him getting that close to just awful offenses that he was going to have to answer for. And they didn't want to be tied up in it. They know they're going to anyway, and trying to decide what is the best thing to do. Do you stay there for the country and try to steer the ship in the right direction, which I think many of them may have been doing? Or do you just jump ship because you know that the ship is going to run into an iceberg anyway and it's going to sink? It's an untenable position to be in. And it just appears that everyone who had anything to do with that campaign, who had anything to do with that cabinet or that leadership has been tainted politically in some way, at least by the people that I talk to, as Americans that I am around, and even people from foreign countries are like, if you had anything to do with it, you're just like, oh God, that's them. Like, well, look what they did to the country. Look what they did. Look, not just him. They say they, because they were there. But now I'm hearing how they tried, and at least in this instance, I'm looking at one instance now, this particular hearing, and hearing testimony from them that they tried. That he was getting information to turn things around and refused.
And I don't want to let the public off the hook here. Because we are ultimately responsible for who we put in office.
This is true. Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't like back in the 60s when they voted in Nixon, they had, Kennedy, Nixon, and then Johnson, Nixon. And so they were, all kind of, okay, well, Nixon sounds like he's better, and so put him in. But with Donald Trump, we had more than enough evidence of the type of person he was, the type of person he was going to be, and what he was going to do in this office. I mean, anybody who thought that, having the Paris Accords thrown out was a good idea, well, move to Florida, you'll be underwater soon, and we won't have to worry about you. Anybody who wanted to have a president who thought it's okay to refer to women as grab them by the... seriously. I mean, come on.
And got voted in. I know. Okay.
I mean, yes. And we were all sitting here pretty, looking at the polls saying, oh, Hillary's going to win. And trust me, I'm not a Hillary fan. Never have been.
Right.
But when you have to choose a lesser of the two evils, I'll choose Hillary.
It was. And to use that, the platform of successful businessmen with his track record. And
exactly.
It just shows you the PR, public relations campaigns work. Okay.
And so what we really need to do as a people is to start taking this for serious. I mean, we fucked around with that with the election in 2016, and it cost us a lot. It cost us a lot of reputation around the world, and look what it's done to our country. So we need to start, coming out in force and overwhelming these idiots that are showing up to, pretty much play baseball with our Constitution. They don't want to follow it. No, I'm sorry. They want to follow the Constitution like they want to follow the Bible. They want to pick and choose what they want to do, ignore everything else, and then make up their own rules after that. Well, if we allow them to do that, it's our fault. It's not their fault. We know what kind of people are running right now in the Republican Party. Trust me, I'm not picking on the Republicans. It's just, you got Greg Abbott, you got Ron DeSantis, and you got Crawford, Boebert.
Not to mention some of the
Marjorie
oldies
Taylor
like Cruz
Greene.
and
You got
Marjorie
McCarthy.
Taylor Greene.
You got, Turtle Boy.
Please don't. Please. Could we make this a no turtle zone just for the day? I can't. We can't bring
McConnell. Okay, I'll say.
Well, you can't. No. I mean, don't bring McConnell into it, because I can't.
Sorry,
I don't.
But he's part of the problem.
Are you kidding? He is the problem.
And
he's like a wall of
we need to
ridiculousness.
vote
Yeah,
these people out of office. I
yeah.
mean,
But
how do we get
mm,
over? How do we? People are asking.
mhm,
How do we ensure our country runs smoother in the future? Well, here's how you ensure it. You go out and elect reasonable men to run the country. You don't elect these idiots who have
mhm,
been there for God knows how long, and will only put forth legislation they want. They
mhm.
don't give a shit what the other side's bringing to the
Oh,
to the table.
but here's the thing. I mean, that's what's been happening. Is like I truly believe that the whole thing, when I look at how he got into office and people started believing that public relations machine, it was the fear, frustration, and hopelessness of the country that
Hmm.
was used against us. Actual reasonable people decided there wasn't anything good we could do about anything anymore, and they just went for the out of the box option,
Yeah.
the one that was not normal, that would just be the craziest thing to do almost, because they needed some kind of change. They needed things to change, and things weren't changing because our system was bogging down, slowing down. People's voices weren't being heard regardless of who was in
Right.
office, and that had been happening for years before. It was a culmination, it was a turning point. When something like that happens, we really need to look solidly at why and how. And and for me it was so disheartening because I don't see, even now, I don't know about you, Quiz, but even now I don't see people getting involved. They feel even more disheartened and
Yeah.
hopeless after that
Yeah.
happened. And
Oh yeah.
I have caused I have cousins and I have nephews and nieces who are of voting age who just, you know I'm talking to them, and some of them are just to the point where they're like, why should I get involved? It's never going to change. It's never going to. And I'm
And
like, no,
that's
no,
the
no.
problem.
That's the problem. Like, not enough of us are saying that we want it. Like, we got to get out there and say that we want it to
Right.
change, and we have to do everything that we can to make it change. And if it involves changing the system some way, well, we got to do it. But we got to find people that'll speak out on it. And unless they hear our voices, no candidate's going to run on that platform.
Right. Yeah.
Unless we are speaking about it loudly on our own without a candidate, they're not gonna put a candidate forward that
And the
even
and the
wants to do it.
the
Right.
other thing we need to remember as adults who are 18 and older is sometimes we lose and we can't get, all pissy about it. We can't say, well, they didn't elect the candidate that I wanted, so I'm never gonna,
Mm,
do this again. I mean, come on. If you think you're going to always, be an activist for the right candidate and always have that candidate get the nomination, run for president and win, well, you've got poor expectations. You
mm-hmm,
need to manage those expectations. What we need to do is get out there, be involved, choose your candidate, at least go out and help, and whoever gets put up, then take a look at both people. And
mm-hmm,
I'm not a dead Republican, I'm not a dead Democrat, I'm down the middle. I don't care who they put up. I will compare both and I will see which one I feel would do the best job to run the country. If it's a Democrat, fine. If it's a Republican, fine. But at least
mm-hmm,
vote. For God's sakes, we
mm-hmm.
have this wonderful system where we get to elect our leaders every 4 years, and all we do is sit around and twiddle our thumbs and then complain about the system.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And that's why I always used to tell everyone. I told my daughter, I tell everyone. I told her husband, everybody that sat at my dinner table that would complain about politics. If you didn't vote, I don't want to hear it. If you didn't
Yep.
weigh in, I don't want to hear it. Okay,
Yeah.
whether you win or lose, be part of the process. Okay, you got to try, and sometimes it comes down to trying locally. Like, just start locally. I know that sounds ridiculous, but you got to start somewhere.
Well,
It don't have
locally
to
is
be the
where you're.
president. Hmm.
Yeah,
That's
locally
where
is
you
where it's going to affect you the most anyway. So you should
right.
do
Hmm.
your local elections. You
Hmm.
should get involved. And if
Yeah.
you think you can do better, go and run. And you think, well, I can't run because, I don't have the money. I can't do this because I'm not old enough.
Mhm.
Let us remember that a 15-year-old boy, I believe, was it in Michigan or Wisconsin, was elected fucking mayor of his own town.
He was.
15 years old. So don't tell me you can't do it if a 15-year-old hormonal boy can put away his toys for long enough to get elected.
I just think it's hard for people to believe in something when they don't feel that they have the power behind to do anything about it sometimes. And I understand the frustration. And I'm just asking people to get a little more involved. If you really won't change. I know I'll speak about it, and I'll tell you, like, I do a lot of writing. I do a lot of emailing. I vote in everything. I even vote in the school board elections. So come on, like, I vote on everything. So I'm not going to sit here, and say that it's easy, because it's not. I realize it's not. But it shouldn't mean you don't put your voice out there. That is how our country is, and as frustrating as what we see happening go, like even today, like Kyle is mentioning, that the man doesn't want to testify today. Okay. He's the ex-campaign manager, and he don't want to testify, and he's going against this, because they got subpoenaed. Okay. This is a serious hearing. They have subpoena power. It is like law. They're supposed to show up. He's doing everything he can not to. And like Kyle said, he may not even come to the other hearings. Like, they're going to try, I'm sure, but they may end up just playing his depositions and clips because they can't get him here to testify, which he should be doing. I mean, as he should be putting his American citizenship ahead of his campaign job. Okay, when you get a legal subpoena, his former campaign, you know what I'm saying? Like, the point of law, okay, point of, are you an American citizen or what? Do you get to throw everything we stand for aside every time it's inconvenient for you? Sounds like that some of them really
some of them actually believe that they don't need to show up.
They don't need to show up because it's not our party running the hearings. This is a bipartisan hearing. They're all people from both sides. This is the only bipartisan.
Only bipartisan hearing
that there's going to be. Okay, this is the one that has everybody involved, and there will be a Republican only one. I heard coming up. I think Quiz broke that news to me. Yes, Quiz broke that news to me.
It's kind of funny, though.
I barely had a couple of sips of coffee, and I had to hear that. I was like, oh.
If you haven't heard, the Republicans in the House are doing their own committee hearing about January 6th, and they're going to focus on why weren't there enough police officers there. Now, for one, this is just, I mean, I'm sure there's some smarter people than me in the chat who could say what fallacy that is, but why do you have to have more police officers there for a crowd that isn't rioting?
You don't. And isn't that shooting yourself in the foot, as the reason they didn't send anyone there to help was because Trump wouldn't?
Oh, that's right.
Right.
All that extra resources have to be approved by a certain man named Donald Trump. That didn't happen.
Isn't this why we're having this hearing? Is because he wouldn't send anybody in to help when it all went down.
And we found that out at the last hearing. And that was a huge shocker to me, that they tried to change the narrative where Mike Pence was the one who calls in the National Guard, the military, the police, the whole bit. Yep. And yet Donald Trump never once picked up the phone, never once communicated with anyone.
Nope. And actually refused to on several occasions. And Kyle, you are so good with American law here. Like, I'm actually embarrassed by how well you know American law not being here. Like, thank you. Well, this is actually spot on because, the White House, the campaign manager, Stepien, was not a White House staffer, and he's an outside employee as campaign manager. So he doesn't have, or he cannot claim, executive privilege like the other staffers, which is why his testimony was so important, and probably why he is fighting so hard not to be here, because he doesn't have anything to hide behind, and he's going to have to tell the truth.
Not to mention that the Supreme Court's already ruled that executive privilege can't be claimed anyway,
I know
unless
they did.
unless this
Right.
administration allows them to.
Well, it can't. Executive privilege can never be used when against breaking laws. Anyway,
Right,
like
right.
but they'd have to actually prove he broke a law first, and then it all falls apart. But still, even for these, they said they need to come and testify, and many of them are, to their credit, and I will give them credit. It is making me look at them differently. Okay, when I had heard other reporting that Barr, for instance, had done in regards to the voting
Hmm.
system or in regards to other things, I felt that he was being a little partisan. I
Yeah,
thought he
he
was being
was.
towing the line, the campaign line. And I was disheartened because he's a legal professional, and I feel a certain way about that. And I want more independence, and but I understand, you're chosen for a job and you need to represent. um but to hear him speak recently about it, more clearly and more like I would want someone individually about the issue, clearly, right and wrong, and where the laws actually stand. I got a little more faith in that there were people involved, that there
Well,
are people in politics that might, occasionally, show a little backbone, a little more
right.
fortitude.
And that goes
Mm.
back to what we said earlier. Everybody has their line.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, William Barr's line was damn close to
Oh yeah.
crossing the
Mm.
Constitution,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people are like that. I'm not so worried about. It's when they walk over that line that upsets me. It shows that they have
Mm-hmm.
no respect for our system, no
Mm-hmm.
respect for our laws, no respect for our Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I'm impressed at how many of you know about how hard it was to get here to these hearings, and know what was going on behind the scenes. I mean, you guys are all well versed. Like, if I had known this, I'd be speaking on this a lot sooner. Many more Republicans, per organics, says they had the opportunity to take part in this hearing but refused. Complaining that there aren't enough Republicans involved is like complaining you're cold when you refuse to wear clothes. And I so agree, because this was the bipartisan one. And there, thankfully we do have some strong voices. To hear Liz Cheney speak was um, eye-opening for me. That there are
mhm.
Republicans willing to speak out, to call out their fellow Republicans and remind them that history will be made. And what side do they want to be on? They
Yeah.
are, if you're going to double down, make sure you have enough backing for it.
I take it that Brokia Monkley might not be an American. Why
I
were
don't
there
think so.
automated sentry guns in place? Well,
Mm,
let's put Hollywood aside.
yeah,
There
we
aren't
don't have that. Yeah.
automated sentry guns in the
Yeah.
Capitol. There's not automated sentry
Mm-mm.
guns on
No.
in the
Mm-mm.
White House.
Mm-mm.
Although on the White House top, you will find certain Secret Service agents
Mm-hmm.
who are always up there for a
Mm-hmm.
specific reason now.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not
Yeah. Mm,
automated, and thankfully,
mm-hmm.
it's not automated.
Mm. Oh, Alice, here's the crust of this. Alice, in wrongful conviction land, they shouldn't get any immunity for a coup. Period. If they try to overthrow the government, shake your head. I agree. But here's the thing: this is what the hearing's about. Was it a
Hmm.
protest? Was it a civilized protest, or was it a coup? Like, there's the question, and that's like they're trying to say that because he wasn't actually inaugurated yet, Biden, that this was really just a protest by the president and people that supported him.
Well, wait
Mm,
a minute. The president
yeah,
can't protest.
exactly.
When you
Mm,
become president, you give up certain rights. You do. I mean,
exactly. You do.
you
Hmm.
have to. You
Yeah, well, you're
can't. You
supposed to
can't.
represent all the people
Yes,
too. Not,
exactly.
yeah. Hmm.
I mean, you're supposed to be the head of our country, not some little brat who's using your position to A, make money, B, try and reverse laws that have already been enacted because you don't
Hmm.
like them, you know, damage your ecology even more than it
Hmm.
is, damage
Yep.
your economy even more than
Hmm.
it is.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, we knew that Trump was an isolationist before he took office.
Mhm.
Again, we knew this, and yet we're all shocked when he starts throwing tariffs around like they were candy. I mean, it's
Mhm.
like, dude.
Yeah. 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 Oh, yeah. Brakia Monkley tells us that she's from South Carolina. She is an American.
Wow.
Mhm.
Well,
Mhm.
unfortunately, they don't have all these things that Hollywood movies think, and
No,
I
but
will be
they do
honest.
have armed officers, but
They do
they
have
don't.
armed officers,
Yeah,
and
they're
I will
not.
be
Yeah.
honest with you. I was shocked that only one person was shot and killed that day by
Hmm.
those armed officers.
Right,
Because
because
quite frankly,
there was a lot of
I think
panic going on.
I
Yeah.
think any time that they tried to force those doors open, I would have just put a bullet into the door. I mean, I'm protecting the seat of my government at this point, and you're
Hmm.
trying to break in. You're definitely an insurrectionist and a traitor at this point.
Hmm.
So, as far as I'm
Exactly.
concerned,
Hmm.
I'm going to protect
Hmm.
the people behind me. And let's everybody likes to talk about why didn't the Secret Service do this, or why didn't Secret
Hmm.
remember that the Secret Service, they have one freaking job:
Hmm.
protect,
Protect.
secure.
Right. Hmm.
They needed time to get those people out the back way while the other
Hmm.
people were coming in through the front way.
Because all of the everybody was there. There was politicians all over the place that
And do
needed
you
to,
know what happened
right.
as
Hmm.
soon as the Secret Service had
Hmm.
everybody secured and out of there?
Hmm.
That's when you started seeing the military, or
Hmm.
the SWAT teams break in with their MP5s pointing and saying, move and I'll shoot you. And everybody,
Hmm.
goes
Yep.
flat, and we
Hmm.
start taking back not only the Capitol building, but then we start taking back the Capitol grounds, which,
Right. Hmm.
taking back the Capitol building was fairly easy. I mean,
But
those
they had
people weren't
the
armed,
grounds. When you look at the
but the
pictures that I've
grounds,
been
my
using, you
God.
get to see how many people were everywhere on the outside also, that the whole grounds were
Hmm.
full. And not many people realize that, because all the footages that we see, the video
Yeah.
footage
And that
that was
day
on the
when we
news and everything,
watched,
was just in the building. But
if you were watching that day
mhm,
that January 6th happened, and if you watched the whole thing, when it got into the night, and
mhm,
you're thinking everybody's moving too slow, they need to move faster. Well, if you notice that they were building a ring of people around the rioters,
mhm.
and then they were slowly moving them to where
And they
they
were
wanted
moving
them to
in.
be,
Mhm,
so
mhm,
they have another group of people standing there ready to arrest everybody.
mhm,
And that's what they did.
mhm.
They put
Right.
them all into a box, and then they went in and started
Mhm,
throwing handcuffs on, saying, nope, we don't
mhm.
care who you are. If you're in this box right now, it means
Right.
we need to talk to you. I mean,
Exactly.
there were
Mhm.
some journalists who got caught in that box because they were doing their job.
And
But
then,
still,
but
that's
still,
what happens.
but those journalists weren't fighting against speaking to them either, and they knew
Oh
the
no.
process, and they're fine, like but it was the ones who were there that knew that they were causing harm that have the biggest issue. And there have been quite a few trials, and quite a few people have been prosecuted for this already. And it's moving up the top, and it's because of those people that actually spoke on how this was organized, why it was organized, and where it was all coming from, that we got to this point that we were able to actually get this community together. So, I am encouraged that when push comes to shove, some people will actually do the right thing and speak the
Yeah.
truth. And speak the truth. I mean, because if your convictions are so strong, if this is truly something you believe in, then tell the truth about it.
Yeah.
You don't have to hide it in the dark shadows. If it's really something that you think was you had every right to do, then why are you lying about it?
Yeah.
Tell the
And we
truth.
know why some
Mm.
Republicans won't
Hmm.
won't be here
Oh,
to
exactly.
testify,
Yeah.
because they were
You,
involved in some manner or
oh,
form.
there's so many there's so many good comments here in the chat that I want to bring up for you. First of all, here's a good question. I want to know what you think about this too, because I'm not sure. Kyle's Goldfish wants to know who told the committee that comment on hanging Pence when Trump said, and they have it, the quote, maybe they have the right idea. He deserves it, because that blew her mind. It blew
Yeah.
mine too. That was his vice president. They were a team, and he was quite
Yeah.
willing to throw him under the bus,
Of course he
because
was.
he wouldn't do what Trump wanted him to do. Like, he was actually trying to
Yeah.
say what is the right thing to do. Okay, and who do we think blabbed? Who do you think actually
Well,
gave him that?
that's going to be a
Yeah.
simple one. I mean, I'm sure eventually they'll play it, but it had to be somebody who was in the Oval Office when he said it. or was in the West
Mm-hmm.
Wing when he said it, had to be somebody that was right there to hear it.
Mm-hmm.
So it had to be an aide or one of his, his
Mm-hmm.
son or his son-in-law, his daughter,
Mm-hmm.
his wife, who knows? I mean, but somebody who was sitting there in that room with him
Mm-hmm.
probably heard him say it and thought to themselves, holy crap, what am I involved in?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think if it was me, I would have said, oh my God, I suddenly have diarrhea. I need to leave. Sorry. And you just get up and leave, because I wouldn't want to hear
Mm-hmm.
any more than that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would have, immediately called the Secret Service and said, President Trump just said Mike Pence should be hung.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And
Sandy
it could
wants to know.
also have been a Secret Service agent who
It
is
could.
retiring and
Yeah.
doesn't want to
There's.
stay in his job. I mean,
Yeah. But basically, it is definitely somebody who was in that room and was just as appalled at what was said as we are.
mm-hmm.
Okay, and that I have to, whoever it was, thank you for speaking up, because that is appalling. And that does speak volumes as to what was actually going on in that room. What we all suspected.
Yeah.
It does speak volumes. Sandy wants to know, when did we stop holding our elected officials to a higher standard? That's what I'd like to know.
Wow.
Me too, love. Me too. Because
I'm gonna be on the opposite side of this one. I know I'm in trouble now.
I know they're human. I don't think there's an opposite side to that. We all do agree they're human.
I think we should hold them to the same standard as we hold everybody else. And
ourselves.
let's face it,
Right.
if we went into a courtroom and lied as much as Trump did under oath, we would be put up on perjury, we would be found guilty, and we'd be thrown in jail.
And that's exactly what we want here.
And that's exactly what should happen. If you perjured yourself, if you've done something while you're in office, and let's remember that you took an oath, and that oath counts. You just don't get to say the words and think, oh, who cares? No, that oath is just as good as the oath you took in court. You promised to protect the Constitution. You promised to protect the people. It wasn't that you promised to protect the president. Nobody, and I can promise you this, nobody has ever taken an oath to protect the president of the United States. The oath simply states that you will protect the Constitution against foreign and domestic. And let's face it, the president is pretty damn domestic.
Oh, yeah. Very much so. Very. I'm going to tell you. You know what? It kind of encourages me, Quiz, to be up here with someone obviously much younger than I am. We'll be honest. That is actually as passionate about getting the process back on track, and that actually knows a lot about what is going on. To me, that's very encouraging.
I mean, when Trump started this whole crap, I immediately went back, because I was asking people, well, because people were saying, or I kept saying, well, who's worse than Trump? And then people would say Nixon, and I went, huh? What?
Yeah.
Nixon? Really? Well, hold on, I better go back and look at Nixon. And then I went, oh,
exactly.
He's just as bad as Trump, except when he finally got put in a corner, he went, okay, I give up, I'll leave. That's the big difference. I mean, he's just up and left. He didn't try and overthrow the government as well. He tried to overthrow. He tried to do some shady things, which
he did.
Count as treason, maybe, but he certainly didn't incite a riot to go down and break into the Capitol building.
Exactly, and here's the thing: when caught with his so-called pants down, his hands in the cookie jar or whatever you want to call it, he said, "Okay, yeah, all right, you got me, not much I'm going to be doing about it. I see how this is going to go. Let me just own it and leave." Like, okay,
I mean, when his own people started to turn against him, he knew he was just hosed. It's like,
because he was my first experience in politicians where the political and the mob mentality kind of like collided, and then I realized, well, they're the same thing. They're the same kinds of organization.
What I don't
understand, I don't know why I was so surprised, but
what I didn't understand with Nixon was the president at that time ran the tape recorder.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
And I'm thinking, wait a minute. He kept all this other shit against himself, He only erased, what was it, 3 minutes, 9 minutes, 18 minutes?
I know, but
a certain amount. And I'm thinking, well, good God, what was on that missing stuff then?
Exactly.
If you didn't erase all this other stuff that convicts you,
what did you erase?
Like,
what was it? It was, I don't know. It is a bit odd. Not a lot of people pick up on that. Like, so
I think what it was is that he had talked to the aliens at Area 51, and they advised him.
Oh God, here comes your tinfoil hat. Please spare me. Spare me the tinfoil hat. Like, I don't, come on. Like,
now let's see how many conspiracy theorists will pick up on that and run with it.
Hopefully. I'm hoping there are none in the chat. But anyway, one of the, we were talking before about, the committee being bipartisan, which I'm happy it is at least somewhat bipartisan as it is. But you remember, Kyle's is reminding me, because I also thought this was absolutely ridiculous, that the Republicans tried to put on the committee people that were actually part of this whole thing. The Republicans that are actually the fingers are going to be pointed towards, that had something to do with this, okay, and that were in support of it, they wanted to be on the committee of investigating it. And it's just
then they wondered why Pelosi had the balls to say no. I mean, and I will say this, I was shocked that Pelosi had the balls to say no. I really was.
You know what? I was glad that she found them. I mean, when we voted her in, she had them. Okay.
It was nice that she finally stood up and said,
Because listen, Quiz and I we are bipartisan ball breakers here. Seriously, when it comes to politics, we're not playing on either side here. If they're crappy, they're crappy. And Pelosi has, I don't know where she put her balls for the last few years, but she went into office with them. I voted. I was all for her when she got there, and then something happened. She put them. I don't know. Somebody walked off with them. She put them in a drawer. I don't know, in a purse that she forgot and is out of season. Who knows? But lately, though, when it comes to certain things, she has brought them back out again, and I'm happy to see it. I want to see her go out with them. You know what I mean? Because it has been very hard to watch her be so. I agree that you have to get along with everybody. You have to try to toe the middle of the line a lot in politics just to get stuff done. But when things aren't getting done, like, why aren't you being a little stronger about it? Like, shit is not getting done. Because they're not pushing hard enough, in my opinion. I'm not there. I'm not going to say I could do it better, because God, I wouldn't want that job. I'm sorry.
And to be honest, I am woefully disappointed in Joseph Biden as our president.
Yes,
I think he needs to have more balls himself. And I
true,
think
but let's be honest.
Coming into, you know what? If you don't want to approve my budget, if you don't want to approve the things I want, then fine, go without a budget. We'll shut down the government, and I'll let you guys take the hit.
I think he's actually trying not to hurt the people any more than we've been hurt. I think he's in a very difficult position. I think that no matter who got voted in after this catastrophe, and that's what I'm calling it, a catastrophe.
And it might have been because of the pandemic, because let's face it, the pandemic did us
put that on with everything else that was going on in the country, and no one, not a single person you can think of voted into that office is going to be able to do a gosh darn thing. Okay, it's no matter what he does, it's not going to be enough. No, and he's trying to be careful. He's trying not to hurt and dismantle or make it worse than it was. Okay. I just think, not that I think he was going to be wonderful. Okay. Because, I think we needed somebody with a fresher agenda. I don't think we needed somebody towing the party line.
We needed somebody who is stable and going to just rock the boat for a while. I think I think all Americans were tired of 4 years of Twitter blasts.
And at least he's not doing that. Thank God.
10 minutes, for God's sake.
Yeah, at least he's not doing. I just think that no matter what, it was going to be really difficult for anybody. And they wanted, and what they did is they put in a staunch Democratic, somebody we knew, somebody that they knew was going to just do the party line. And I for one would have preferred someone more independent, a younger, more different perspective, somebody willing to shake stuff up. But then again, we needed time to heal. And that might be what
Yes,
they were
we
thinking of.
do.
And I got to give Nick Chris, we do need time to catch our breath. It was a catastrophe what we went through. I don't care what anybody says. It was great damage done to our country as far as out there, the way we look to others. And I know all of you in the chat who are from another country are going to agree with me here. We look like damn idiots, and we've got a lot to recover from. We need to take a breath, take a step back, look at what's going on before we moved forward anywhere. It was a horrible thing to go through as myself. And I'm not recovered yet, as you can hear. As you can hear, I'm not. I probably won't ever. This hearing's helping because I'm glad it took a long time. It took a long time to get this hearing together and get this done. But I'm glad it's finally happening and some truth can be told. All I want is the proper information out there. I want to be told the truth, as an American, and let us deal with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you wondered, my attention was grabbed because there are a construction
Comments?
road crew out there.
Oh, quiz. Quit. No.
Okay. Yeah, we definitely need to get these committee hearings going, or I'm just gonna be staring outside.
Yeah. Hey, and godless, I understand because now I see that you understand because after all, Boris, and I get it. They are similar that way, and I understand that as an English citizen, that you also are now dealing with the same thing we dealt with under Trump, how that looks to other countries, how the stuff that falls out of their mouth is like the most ridiculous stuff you've ever heard, and how embarrassed you might feel. I feel for you. I do, because I know what that felt like. Yeah. I know what it still feels like. Yeah. I know what you're going to be dealing with for a long time when you don't agree with the politics that are going on in your own country, and then you gotta, people are bringing it up all the time and talking about it, but I will never do that to you, dude, because I know what it feels like, that you could talk to me about it anytime, and I know it's not you, it's him. Definitely.
We aren't new. This isn't a new thing. I mean, it's just been a while that it's happened worldwide. I mean, let's face it, the last one probably happened in 1925. Was it 25 they elected him, or 28 when they elected? Yeah. And
who are you talking about?
A shit show that was for the world.
In 1925, who are we talking about?
Actually, he wasn't elected, was he?
Who?
He just took power.
Who?
In Germany.
Oh, well, I know.
And then they had to live with that. And
they did
that for God knows how many years.
And we don't hold that against them. I mean,
no,
that happened.
Don't. I mean, it happened. It happened. Could there have been a better response from the public at the time? Yeah. Do I understand that nobody wanted to put and some people did put their lives on the lines. Some people did step up and say this is not right, and were murdered. And that's a good way to silence people, when you murder the first people who go forward. But yeah, we can't hold that against another country forever. It's wrong to do that.
Yeah. I feel for you on this, regardless, because he said politics aside, at the end of the day, Boris put laws into place around the lockdown, and then they broke them blatantly himself. We kind of have the same situation here, although they're not actually making these laws. They're just disregarding every single one we have. Any chance they get that it doesn't go in their direction, and then trying to say that that's what our country is built on, that because we have the Constitution, they're allowed to break the law, which doesn't make any sense to me.
Our president never enacted a law.
No.
Congress never enacted a law. I mean, the health department, which is the one who not takes over, but has the authority at a time like that to say, okay, you need to do this, you need to do this, and you need to do that. That's that's how it is. You have to do it. And they're allowed to do that. I mean, this was fought back in 1918, and the Supreme Court said, look, this is their authority. This is the one time, time this department has authority. And then you're telling us to deny them their authority because they're smarter than everybody else. They know what's going to work. No,
Mm-hmm.
sorry.
Right.
We're going to listen
I
to the
know.
experts, which I thought is amazing that in 1918 they could figure this out, but in 2020 we
They could
can't.
not. Right, right. Yep. You know, oh, have a good day, Juliana. Thank you for stopping in. Yeah, Sandy's right. Trump ignored the science. They're also one of them is letting you know that it was 1933. Brittany is saying it was 1933 when Hitler.
1933 when
Yes,
he
when
got
he got
elected,
voted in.
but it was
Okay.
after
Mm-hmm.
they had
Mm-hmm.
pretty much coalesced their power base.
Exactly.
So
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of one of those
Um.
elections that like you have in
Mm-hmm.
Russia
Mm-hmm.
or North
The
Korea,
non-election elections. Yeah, the
where you get out
non-elections
and vote
election.
and you vote for one man, and if you
I
don't,
always
we'll kill
wondered,
you.
is their voting card pre-stamped with where they're supposed to put the egg? Like I always wondered about that. Like,
I'm
no,
sure
I
it's
don't mean to make
pre-stamped.
fun. I'm
I'm sure
sure
it's
it's
got a
very
fingerprint
difficult.
already on it, and all
Yeah,
they have to do is
yeah,
put it in the box
yeah.
because
And I really shouldn't make fun because I'm sure it's very difficult to be in that country and not have their say as much as they would want. I would
yeah,
imagine they feel the pressure, but you know.
yeah.
It is difficult. Hello, autistic. Thank you for coming. Yeah. But yeah, like the FIFA elections. Okay, okay, Luke. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
truth. The FIFA elections are, I mean, let's face it, God,
Mm-hmm.
you could do a whole show on FIFA corruption. I mean,
Um.
it follows
Yeah.
the same pattern as
Yeah, but do I
political
want
corruption.
to? I mean, do I want to? Are there enough headache tablets in the world for me to start covering that kind of stuff? I mean, because this does get frustrating because like I agree, like we won't, like what hope is there if we can't like institute change? So you just have to speak on it. You just have to try to fire some people up to actually do what their convictions of. Yo, would you, Charlie? Okay. Well, he'll
I'll,
talk
I'll,
FIFA for
I'll
days.
look at them
Oh
in
god.
shorts.
Oh my god. Stop it right there.
Okay,
Just cut it
stop,
out. Yes,
stop,
yes,
stop.
yes.
Can't
Listen,
turn
we
this into
already
mayhem.
we already have an ex-president. He did that on a regular basis. I don't need you doing it up here with me too. Like,
Wait,
no flashbacks. No.
hey, hold on. I want you to be really clear about this. Donald Trump was not on my side. He was
No,
looking at
he
someone
wasn't
else
on
in
your team.
shorts.
I
I'm
know. No,
looking at what I'm looking at in shorts.
I'm just saying sexist remarks are sexist remarks. I'm being generalized here. That's the bare way. I disparage everybody equally. Like, okay, like I'm just saying. Yeah.
We should get.
Mm-hmm.
We should be pretty close to starting things. How is the
I
committee?
don't. I'm looking down there, and well, I'll show you. This is how the committee is still. Mm,
Oh, there we
there we
go.
go. Yeah, I could
So
refresh it just to double check. I have to go. Well, first I'll take it off the screen before I refresh it because that would look weird. And then,
because you never know, turtle porn might pop up.
McConnell again? No,
Yeah,
God.
McConnell might pop up. You might see his big old face on the screen, and we'd all
Mm-hmm.
die of
Mm-hmm.
shock.
Nope, it still is the same. It still says the
Okay.
same. So I'm waiting. I mean, I know that they have other feeds that are showing like they're all getting inside and things like that, but I'm going for the one that's right on the site and they're not live feeding the
Yeah, and they
the
won't start
hearing
live
yet.
feeding until
Mm-hmm.
they're, I
Yeah,
mean, sitting in
I'm
their
trying.
seats. So
Yeah, I'm trying to be very good and only using the government live feed and stuff like that.
yep.
Trying to be a good bear, obey the YouTube rules and all of that. Well, here we go. And that way I can keep it up too. For those that can't watch it during the day, I got a lot of positive feedback about us the other day when we covered this quiz that we were very polite to let
Hmm.
the speeches happen without interrupting, let the videos play, all that only intercede when there were breaks or,
Yeah, I
when there
mean,
was
I don't.
something really to say, because people could go back and watch it, right, and
Yeah,
find it easily, and we're very pleased that they could get all the information. So
yeah.
that was
I
good.
don't think our voice is going to be needed. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
again, we're allowing the people who have done the investigation
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
to speak out on the information they have found. My
Mm-hmm.
voice isn't going to add to that. I didn't do anything for this committee. I mean, I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
involved. Seriously, I wasn't. And if you ask me again, I'll just lawyer up. So, uh, no, I mean, yeah, I mean, what can we offer? We can
Well,
offer something
well,
during the breaks. We can offer our opinions, or we can tell you what shocks us, or we can tell you why it matters. But
hmm or it just
while
the
they're
encouragement
testifying, yeah,
to stay involved, to get involved,
exactly,
to learn about it. It is important. I mean, that's why I'm doing it, because I think
right,
if I'm going to be watching it anyway, why not watch it with a bunch of you and share the experience and encourage each other to get out there and speak about it
right.
and to make our opinions known. I mean, I don't think that my opinion is any greater than anybody else's. I'm just happy to have a platform right now. That's it. I have a hobby called YouTube that,
Yeah, and I
you
think
know,
it's important. This is
hmm
I can't emphasize this enough. This is one of the most important times in our nation when we were attacked, not by a foreign government, but by our own people
hmm
at a time when we weren't at war. There wasn't any civil war at this point. We were all together.
hmm
And yet, 3,000, however many, decided to storm the Capitol.
hmm
And we need to understand why that happened, how that happened, and hopefully what can we do to make it not happen again? Because let's face
Right.
it, we would be sitting here in a very different position if Donald Trump got his way.
hmm Well,
Because
it does look like the
democracy,
committee is
oh,
coming live. Let's see.
here we go.
Here we go.
Anyway, democracy would have ended the day Donald Trump got his way. The democracy we know and love. We could have seen a different way of it, but trust me, it would have been ugly. It would have been a mutated bastard of what we have.
hmm Now, why did they say it just went live if it didn't go live? Is there a different feed?
Well, they said now it's going to start at 10 a.m. Well, no, that's 9 a.m. Here. Okay,
hmm
never mind. I keep forgetting
I'm
we're an
just,
hour
I'm just,
apart.
I'm checking the notification feed that I got to make sure it says the same thing. Yeah, it says the same thing that I have up. It's the same. We're just waiting.
Yeah, so anybody watching a mainstream network, let us know if it has gone live, and we'll figure
Well,
something out.
no, they're all the same. It's the same feed.
Okay, okay, okay.
Because if you go to the government site, it feeds you right to the YouTube site, which is the
All
only
right.
one that they can all play. They're all playing the same one.
Everybody
Okay.
plays the same
I'll
one.
just leave it there so you all know. As soon as it goes
And
live, we'll
all
see.
you conspiracy
hmm
theorists, every time we see the little wheel on the screen, you
hmm
know that they're trying to
hmm
DOS attack them.
Exactly. And just so listen, Mitch McConnell is the best argument for term limits that I have ever seen
Definitely.
in my life. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about Mitch because he makes my blood boil, to
How
tell you the
about
truth.
Tip?
Who?
Tip
Tip,
O'Neill.
Tip O'Neill? Yeah.
It was a good argument for that too.
He was a good argument for it, but still. You know what, Liz? You're right. The Johnny Depp trial, Fairfax County started on time almost every day, except for that one day when the transcriber was late.
And
And they
here's
can't
where we
start
go back.
without her. Yeah.
Isn't this where we go back to saying we should hold these people to the same standard as we hold everyone else?
Yes,
I'm
term.
just saying, isn't it now that they should be held at the same standard? I mean,
Okay,
and
okay. I'll
okay.
grant
It's
you
not the
that.
committee's fault. It's not the committee's fault that this idiot
Mm-hmm.
decided.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I have to take that back because I'm really
Mm-hmm.
afraid that something may have really happened. Maybe his kid broke his arm. Maybe he broke his kid's arm, so he didn't have to.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't say that.
He says,
But maybe
listen,
the real.
Mark is right. They're listening. They're watching. You're going to get us all locked up or something.
Maybe something really did happen, and it really was a family emergency. I mean, maybe somebody died, and
Yeah,
they're
maybe
dealing with that.
maybe he just doesn't want to do it. Like that, like
That is
maybe
also a
exactly
possibility.
what he's been saying for 18
Oh,
months.
here we go.
The
Here we
Select
go.
Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol will be in order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare the committee in recess at any point. Pursuant to House Deposition Authority Regulation 10, the chair announces the committee's approval to release the deposition material presented during today's hearing. Good morning. Last week, the Select Committee laid out a preview of our initial findings about the conspiracy overseen and directed by Donald Trump to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election and block the transfer of power, a scheme unprecedented in American history. My colleagues and I don't want to spend time talking about ourselves during these hearings, but as someone who's run for office a few times, I can tell you at the end of a campaign, it all comes down to the numbers. The numbers tell you the winner and the loser. For the most part, the numbers don't lie. But if something doesn't add up with the numbers, you go to court to get resolution. And that's the end of the line. We accept those results. That's what it means to respect the rule of law. That's what it means to seek elective office in our democracy. Because those numbers aren't just numbers, they're votes. They're your votes. They are the will and the voice of the people. And the very least we should expect from any person seeking a position of public trust is the acceptance of the will of the people, win or lose. Donald Trump didn't. He didn't have the numbers, he went to court. He still didn't have the numbers, he lost. But he betrayed the trust of the American people. He ignored the will of the voters. He lied to his supporters and the country. And he tried to remain in office after the people had voted him out, and the courts upheld the will of the people. This morning, we'll tell the story of how Donald Trump lost an election and knew he lost an election, and as a result of his loss, decided to wage an attack on our democracy, an attack on the American people by trying to rob you of your voice in our democracy. And in doing so, lit the fuse that led to the horrific violence of January 6th, when a mob of his supporters stormed the Capitol sent by Donald Trump to stop the transfer of power. Today, my colleague from California, Ms. Lofgren, and our witnesses will detail the Select Committee's findings on these matters. But first, I will recognize our distinguished Vice Chair, Ms. Cheney of Wyoming, for any opening statement she'd care to offer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Last week, as the chairman noted, our committee began outlining a 7-part plan overseen by President Trump to overturn the 2020 election. Today, we will begin looking at the initial part of that plan, President Trump's effort to convince millions of Americans that the election was stolen from him by overwhelming fraud. A federal court has already reviewed elements of the committee's evidence on this point and said this, quote, "In the months following the election, numerous credible sources from the president's inner circle to agency leadership and statisticians informed President Trump and Dr. Eastman that there was no evidence of election fraud," close quote, sufficient to overturn the 2020 presidential election. The court's opinion methodically documents each of the principal reasons for that conclusion, and I would urge all those watching to read it. Today, we will begin to show the American people some of our evidence. Today, you will hear much more from a former Attorney General Bill Barr's recorded testimony, and you will hear in greater detail what others in the department told President Trump, that his claims of election fraud were nonsense. You will also hear much more from President Trump's own campaign experts, who had also concluded that his fraud claims could not be supported. Let me focus briefly on just 3 points now. First, you will hear firsthand testimony that the president's campaign advisors urged him to await the counting of votes and not to declare victory on election night. The president understood even before the election that many more Biden voters had voted by mail because President Trump ignored the advice of his campaign experts and told his supporters only to vote in person. Donald Trump knew before the election that the counting of those mail-in ballots in several states would not begin until late in the day and would not be complete for multiple days. This was expected, reported, and widely known. You will also hear testimony that President Trump rejected the advice of his campaign experts on election night and instead followed the course recommended by an apparently inebriated Rudy Giuliani to just claim he won and insist that the vote counting stop, to falsely claim everything was fraudulent. He falsely told the American people that the election was not legitimate. In his words, quote, a major fraud. Millions of Americans believed him. Second, pay attention to what Donald Trump and his legal team said repeatedly about Dominion voting machines. Far-flung conspiracies with a deceased Venezuelan communist allegedly pulling the strings. This was, quote, complete nonsense, as Bill Barr said. President Trump's own campaign advisors, his Department of Justice, and his cybersecurity experts all told him the same thing. Here, for example, is White House lawyer Eric Hirschman. His view was shared by many of the Trump team whom we interviewed.
I thought the Dominion stuff I never saw any evidence whatsoever to sustain those allegations.
And third, as Mike Pence's staff started to get a sense for what Donald Trump had planned for January 6th, they called the campaign experts to give them a briefing on election fraud and all the other election claims. On January 2nd, the general counsel of the Trump campaign, Matthew Morgan, this is the campaign's chief lawyer, summarized what the campaign had concluded weeks earlier, that none of the arguments about fraud or anything else could actually change the outcome of the election.
Generally discussed on that topic was whether the fraud, maladministration, abuse, or irregularities, if aggregated and read most favorably to the campaign, would that be outcome determinative? And I think everyone's assessment in the room, at least amongst the staff, Mark Short, myself, and Greg Jacob, was that it was not sufficient to be outcome determinative.
As is obvious, this was before the attack on the Capitol. The Trump campaign legal team knew there was no legitimate argument, fraud, irregularities, or anything to overturn the election. And yet President Trump went ahead with his plans for January 6th anyway. Mr. Chairman, hundreds of our countrymen have faced criminal charges. Many are serving criminal sentences because they believed what Donald Trump said about the election, and they acted on it. They came to Washington, D.C. at his request. They marched on the Capitol at his request. And hundreds of them besieged and invaded the building at the heart of our constitutional republic. As one conservative editorial board put it recently, quote, Mr. Trump betrayed his supporters by conning them on January 6th, and he is still doing it. Another conservative editorial board that has long supported President Trump said last week, Donald Trump, quote, won't stop insisting that 2020 was stolen, even though he has offered no proof that that is true. And this, Donald Trump now, quote, clings to more fantastical theories, such as Dinesh D'Souza's debunked 2,000 mules, even as recounts in Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin confirm Trump lost. Those are the correct conclusions to draw from the evidence gathered by this committee. We have much more evidence to show the American people on this point than we can reasonably show in one hearing. But today, we will begin. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Without objection, the chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lofgren, for an opening statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. In our opening hearing, we gave an overview of our investigation into the January 6th attack. The plot to overthrow the election was complex and had many parts, which we'll explore in remaining hearings. But today, we examine the false narrative that the 2020 election was, quote, stolen. Former President Trump's plan to overturn the election relied on a sustained effort to deceive millions of Americans with knowingly false claims of election fraud. All elements of the plot relied on convincing his supporters about these false claims. Today, we'll demonstrate the 2020 election was not stolen. The American people elected President Joe Biden. We'll present evidence that Mr. Trump's claims of election fraud were false, that he and his closest advisors knew those claims were false, but they continued to peddle them anyway, right up until the moments before a mob of Trump supporters attacked the Capitol. We'll also show that the Trump campaign used these false claims of election fraud to raise hundreds of millions of dollars from supporters who were told their donations were for the legal fight in the courts. But the Trump campaign didn't use the money for that. The big lie was also a big ripoff. The former president laid the groundwork for these false claims well in advance of the election. As early as April 2020, Mr. Trump claimed that the only way he could lose an election would be as a result of fraud.
You know the things with bundling and all of the things that are happening with votes by mail, where thousands of votes are gathered, and I'm not going to say which party does it, but thousands of votes are gathered and they come in and they're dumped in a location, and then all of a sudden you lose elections that you think you're going to win.
The only way we're going to lose this election is if the election is rigged. Remember that. It's the only way we're going to lose this election.
This is going to be a fraud like you've never seen. Did you see what's going on? Take a look at West Virginia, mailmen selling the ballots. They're being sold. They're being dumped in rivers. This is a horrible thing for our country. This is not going to end well.
Mr. Trump decided even before the election that regardless of the facts and the truth, if he lost the election, he would claim it was rigged. Mr. Trump was right about one thing. It did not end well. On election night, Mr. Trump claimed even before the votes were counted that his loss was a result of fraud. Now, Thursday, we had testimony from Attorney General Barr about the Department of Justice investigation of Mr. Trump's fraud claims. Barr told Trump directly that his claims were BS. Yet, after hearing the truth and that warning from the AG, Mr. Trump continued to peddle the false claims of fraud. You'll hear detailed testimony from Attorney General Barr describing the various election fraud claims the Department of Justice investigated. He'll tell you how he told Mr. Trump repeatedly that there was no merit to those claims. Mr. Barr will tell us that Mr. Trump's election night claims of fraud were made without regard to the truth and before it was even possible to look for evidence of fraud. Attorney General Barr wasn't alone. You'll see and hear today other Department of Justice officials and senior advisors to Mr. Trump that they told him the claims he was making were not supported by evidence. The election fraud claims were false. Mr. Trump's closest advisors knew it. Mr. Trump knew it. That didn't stop him from pushing the false claims and urging his supporters to, quote, fight like hell, to, quote, take back their country. After he lost the election, various legal challenges were made. You'll hear testimony today from a renowned Republican election litigation lawyer who will explain the normal process by which candidates challenge an election. Rather than accept the results of the election and the decisions of the courts, Mr. Trump pursued a different strategy. He tried to convince the American people the election had been stolen. Many of his supporters believed him, and many still believe him today. The attack on January 6th was a direct and predictable result of Mr. Trump's decision to use false claims of election fraud to overturn the election and to cling to power. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. I now welcome our first witness. We're joined today by former Fox News politics editor Chris Stirewalt. Bill Stepien, President Trump's former campaign manager, was subpoenaed to be here and was in Washington this morning, prepared to testify. Kevin Marino, Mr. Stepien's attorney, is here with us today. Thank you, Mr. Marino, for coming. And he has advised us that Mr. Stepien's wife went into labor this morning. Mr. Stepien unexpectedly had to travel to be with his wife, and we wish him the best. Due to the depth and rigor of our investigation, we have several hours of Mr. Stepien's testimony from when we interviewed him in February, and we will be presenting that testimony today. I'll now swear in our witness. The witness will please stand and raise his right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God. Thank you. You may be seated. Let the record reflect the witness answered in the affirmative. I now recognize myself for questions. I want to start by showing a video that tells the story of what was going on in the Trump White House on election night in November of 2020.
Do you remember where you were on the night of the election, November the 3rd?
I was at the White House.
You know where specifically over the course of that night you spent your time within the White House?
There was an event that was organized in the residence, so I moved between the residence, a room sort of off the residence where some family members were.
I take it the president was upstairs in the residence.
He was upstairs. We were kind of on the first floor, so not upstairs. We were with mostly with Ivanka and her brothers and a couple other people who'd be coming in and out.
Can you just describe the atmosphere? What were people expecting that night when you got to the White House?
I think that there was, typically for people who show up there on election night, it's going to be a self-select, more positive environment. I think people were a little bit nervous, not knowing what was going to happen with the red wave or the red mirage as the debate was being carried out.
The Fox News Decision Desk is calling Arizona for Joe Biden. That is a big get for the Biden campaign.
Arizona's called. Do you remember that?
I do.
What do you remember happening where you were when Arizona was called?
There was surprise at the call.
Who was surprised?
Most everyone in the room.
Were you being one of them?
Yes.
Did that shift the atmosphere or the attitude in the White House?
Completely.
How so? Can you describe that?
Because Fox News was the first one to go out and say that.
So was it anger kind of directed towards Fox News for making a call more so than like disappointment that maybe the campaign lost Arizona?
All the above.
So both anger and disappointment.
Both disappointed with Fox and concerned that maybe our data or our numbers weren't accurate.
Were you in the White House residence during the sort of past midnight into the early morning hours of November 4th?
Yes, oh sure, it went over beyond midnight, yes.
Do you remember Rudy Giuliani being at the White House on election night and into the early hours the next morning?
I do.
What do you remember about when he came?
He was, I had heard that he was upstairs, in that aforementioned reception area. And he was looking to talk to the president, and it was suggested instead that he come talk to several of us down off the map room.
You said that you had heard that Mr. Giuliani wanted to talk to the president, and then he was directed your way. Did you end up talking to Mr. Giuliani when he was directed your way?
I did.
What was that conversation?
A lot of conversations were directed my way. A few of us, myself, Jason Miller, Justin Clark, and Mark Meadows, gathered in a room off the map room to listen to whatever Rudy presumably wanted to say to the president.
Was there anyone in that conversation who, in your observation, had too much to drink?
Like Mayor Giuliani.
Tell me more about that. What was your observation about his potential intoxication during that discussion about what the president should say when he's addressed the nation on election night?
And the mayor was definitely intoxicated, but I do not know that his level of intoxication when he spoke with the president, for example.
Were you part of any discussions with the people I mentioned, Mr. Stepien, Mr. Meadows, or anyone else, about whether the president should make any sort of speech on election night?
I mean, I spoke to the president. They may have been present, but President spoke to the president several times that night.
There were suggestions by, I believe it was Mayor Giuliani, to go and declare victory and say that we won it outright.
It was far too early to be making any calls like that. Ballots were still being counted. Ballots were still going to be counted for days. And it was far too early to be making any proclamation like that.
I remember saying that, to the best of my memory, I was saying that we should not go and declare victory until we had a better sense of the numbers.
Okay, can you be more specific about that conversation, in particular what Mayor Giuliani said, your response, and then anybody else in the room's response?
I think effectively Mayor Giuliani was saying, we won it. They're stealing it from us. Where'd all the votes come from? We need to go say that we won. And essentially that anyone who didn't agree with that position was being weak.
What was your view at the time as to what he should or shouldn't say?
I don't know that I had a firm view as to what he should say in that circumstance. The results were still being counted. It was becoming clear that the race would not be called on election night.
My belief, my recommendation was to say that votes were still being counted. It's too early to tell, too early to call the race, but we proud of the race we ran, and we think we're in good position, and we'll have more to say about this the next day or the next day whenever we had something to say.
And did anybody who was a part of that conversation disagree with your message?
Yes.
Who was that?
The president disagreed with that. I don't recall the particular words. He thought I was wrong. He told me so, and that they were gonna go he was gonna go in a different direction.
This is a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to our country. We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election. We did win this election.
Mr. Stirewalt, did President Trump have any basis to declare victory on November 4th, 2020? Thank you. Mr. Stepien also testified that President Trump had no basis for declaring victory at that point in time.
My belief, my recommendation was to say that votes were still being counted. It's too early to tell. Too early to call the race, but we proud of the race we ran, and we think we're in good position, and we'll have more to say about this the next day or the next day whenever we had something to say.
Thank you. Mr. Stirewalt, after the votes were counted, who won the presidential election of 2020?
Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. of the great state of Delaware.
Thank you. That's the bottom line. We've had an election. Mr. Trump lost, but he refused to accept the results of the democratic process. Pursuant to Section 5C8 of House Resolution 503, I now recognize the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lofgren, for questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Stirewalt, I'd like you to explain a term that was thrown around a lot during the election, and that's the so-called red mirage. What does that mean?
So in the 40 or 50 years, let's say, that Americans have increasingly chosen to vote by mail or early or absentee, Democrats prefer that method of voting more than Republicans do. So basically, in every election, Republicans win election day and Democrats win the early vote. And then you wait and start counting. And it depends on which ones you count first, but usually it's election day votes that get counted first. And you see the Republicans shoot ahead. And then the process of bailing and binding and unbinding all those mail-in votes. And some states like Pennsylvania refuse to count the votes first. So you have to wait for all of that to come in. So in every election, certainly a national election, you expect to see the Republican with a lead, but it's not really a lead. When you put together a jigsaw puzzle, it doesn't matter which piece you put in first. It ends up with the same image. So for us, who cares? But that's because no candidate had ever tried to avail themselves of this quirk in the election counting system. We had gone to pains, and I'm proud of the pains we went to make sure that we were informing viewers that this was going to happen, because the Trump campaign and the president had made it clear that they were going to try to exploit this anomaly. And we knew it was going to be bigger because the percentage of early votes was higher, right? We went from about 45% of the votes being early and absentee to, because of the pandemic, that increased by about 50%. So we knew it would be longer, we knew it would be more. So we wanted to keep telling viewers, hey, look, the number that you see here is sort of irrelevant because it's only a small percentage of these votes.
So this red mirage, that's really what you expected to happen on election night.
Happens every time.
Thank you, Mr. Stirewalt. Now, I'd like to play a clip of Attorney General Bill Barr, who also explains what was expected to happen on election night.
Right out of the box on election night, the president claimed that there was major fraud underway. I mean, this happened, as far as I could tell, before there was actually any potential of looking at evidence. And it seemed to be based on the dynamic that at the end of the evening, a lot of Democratic votes came in, which changed the vote counts in certain states. And that seemed to be the basis for this broad claim that there was major fraud. And I didn't think much of that because people had been talking for weeks and everyone understood for weeks that that was going to be what happened on election night.
Mr. Stepien obviously could not be with us today, and it's proper for him to be with his wife as they welcome their child. But he also had discussions with the president about the red mirage. That is, that it would be a long night and that early votes would favor him, but that lots more votes would be counted over the course of the night and the days after. So let's play clip 1 from our interview with Mr. Stepien.
I recounted back to that conversation with him, in which I said, just like I said in 2016 was going to be a long night. I told him in 2020 that it was going to be a process again, as the early returns are going to be, positive, and we're going to, be watching the returns of ballots as, they rolled in thereafter.
So
Is it fair to say you're trying to present what you thought would be a realistic picture of what might happen over the course of that night, being election night?
That night and the days that followed. Yeah, I always told the president the truth, and I think he expected that from me, and I told him it was going to be a process. It was going to be, we're going to have to wait and see how this turned out. So I just like I did in 2016, I did the same thing in 2020.
So let's watch a short clip of President Trump speaking after he received that information from his campaign advisors.
We want all voting to stop. We don't want them to find any ballots at 4 o'clock in the morning and add them to the list.
So when former President Trump said that, it contradicted what his advisors had warned would happen. We all know that mail-in ballots played an important role in the 2020 election. However, President Trump continuously discouraged mail-in voting. Mr. Stepien was so concerned about the president's position on mail-in voting that in the summer of 2020, he met with President Trump along with House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. Let's play clip 4.
Meeting that was had, in particular, I invited Kevin McCarthy to join the meeting, he being of like mind on the issue with me, in which we made our case for why we believed mail-in voting, not to be a bad thing for his campaign. But the president's mind was made up, and you understand, how many times to, go to the well on a particular topic.
Yeah, I understand. Tell me a little bit more about the argument that you and Mr. McCarthy made to the president in that meeting as to why it wasn't a bad thing that mail-in voting was available.
Largely two pillars to that argument, both of which I've previously mentioned. One, leaving a good deal to chance, pushing or urging your voters to vote only on election day leaves a lot to chance. That's A. And B, also previously mentioned, the fact that the Trump campaign, the Republican National Committee, the Republican Party had an advantage of grassroots workers and volunteers on the ground that would allow, an advantage to enhance return rates of ballots that were mailed. Those were the two pillars of the argument.
I see. And what, if anything, do you recall Representative McCarthy saying during that meeting?
We were echoing the same argument. I mean, his words echoed mine, and vice versa on those two topics.
Mr. Stirewalt, you were at the decision desk at Fox News on election night, and you called Arizona early for President Biden, which was controversial. How did you make that call, and where did you think the race stood in the early hours of the next day?
Well, it was really controversial to our competitors who we beat so badly by making the correct call first. Our decision desk was the best in the business, and I was very proud to be a part of it. Because we had partnered with the Associated Press and the National Opinion Research Center at the University of Chicago, thanks to my colleague and friend Arnon Mishkin, had built a wonderful device for forecasting the outcomes of elections. So we had a different set of data than our competitors did. We had more research, and we had a better system, and we had a great team. So what you're waiting to see is, do the actual votes match up with the expectations in the poll? The real votes are testing the quality of your poll in targeted precincts and in targeted places. And let me tell you, our poll in Arizona was beautiful. And it was doing just what we wanted it to do. And it was cooking up just right. And at some point, and I forget exactly who, but at some point it became clear that Arizona was getting ready to make a call. So we my boss, Bill Salmon, said, we're not making any call until everybody says yes, because that was always our policy, unanimity. And you have to understand, in this room, you have, the best people from academia, Democrats, Republicans, a broad cross section of people who had worked together for a decade, who are really serious about this stuff. So we knew it would be a consequential call because it was one of 5 states that really mattered, right? Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona were the ones that we were watching. We knew it would be significant to call any one of those 5, but we already knew Trump's chances were very small and getting smaller based on what we had seen. So we were able to make the call early. We were able to beat the competition. We looked around the room, everybody says yay, and on we go. And by the time we found out how much everybody was freaking out and losing their minds over this call, we were already trying to call the next state. We had already moved on. We were to Georgia, we were to North Carolina, we were looking at these other states. So we thought we were pleased, but not surprised.
I see. After the election, as of November 7th, in your judgment, what were the chances of President Trump winning the election?
After that point?
Yes.
None. I mean, I guess it's always possible that you could have, a truckload of ballots be found somewhere, I suppose. But once you get into this space, ahead of today, I thought about what are the largest margins that could ever be overturned by a recount, and the kind of stuff that we heard Mike Pence talking about, sounding like a normal Republican that night when he said, we'll keep every challenge. Nothing like that. In a recount, you're talking about hundreds of votes. When we think about calling a race, one of the things that we would think about is it outside the margin of a recount? And when we think about that margin, we think about, in modern history, you're talking about 1,000 votes, 1,500 votes at the way, way outside. Normally, you're talking about hundreds of votes, maybe 300 votes that are going to change. So the idea that through any normal process in any of these states, remember, he had to do it thrice, right? He needed 3 of these states to change. And in order to do that, I mean, you're at an infant, you're better off to play the Powerball than to have that come in.
On November 7th, the other major news outlets called the race for President Biden. Now, Mr. Stepien told the committee that he thought the odds were, and this is a quote, very, very, very bleak, and held a meeting with the president that same day. Let's show clip 8, video clip 8.
I mean, with each day that wore on, I mean, the trajectory of the race on election night, Trump ahead in many states. And as that week wore on, as the 3rd became the 4th, became the 5th, and so on and so forth, and the vote by mail ballots were tabulated, Trump's lead, grew more narrow, and in some places, Biden surpassed, Trump in the vote totals. So as the week wore on, as we paid attention to those numbers multiple times a day, internally, I was feeling less confident for sure.
What was your view on the state of the election at that point?
Very, very, very bleak. We told him, the group that went over there outlined, my belief in chances for success at this point, and then we pegged it at 5, maybe 10% based on recounts that either were automatically initiated or could be initiated based on realistic legal challenges, not all the legal challenges that eventually were pursued. But it was my belief is that it was a very, very, 5 to 10%. It's not a very good optimistic outlook.
Now, as President Trump and others continued to claim that the election was stolen, there were lawyers who were a part of the campaign lawyers, who were responsible for investigating the fraud claims. That includes Alex Cannon, who could not validate the claims that were being made, including those being made by the president. Let's roll video 13.
This is an email. It's two emails, actually. The first is from Alex Cannon to you and Faith McPherson. And then you forward that email on to Mark Meadows, Justin Clark, and Jason Miller, the subject being AZ Federal ID Voters. If you look at the original email there, it says, Bill, we completed the AZ analysis you requested. I assume that's about Arizona. And because of the substantial uncertainty surrounding the databases, this is a highly unreliable way to identify ineligible voters. Can you explain the task that you gave to Ms. Cannon for this Arizona analysis?
Sure. Previously, I described some of my frustration with some of the claims that people would throw at President Trump regarding, need to look at this, this happened in this state or that happened in that state. And it would be, those would flow to us to look into. I talked about that before, I think.
Yeah.
This is an example of that. I recall in Arizona, someone had thrown out, I believe this to be the claim, that there were thousands of illegal citizens, people not eligible to vote, having cast their ballots in Arizona. Someone had thrown out that claim to President Trump. And with, the margins being as close as they were, as I previously described, that could potentially matter. So this wild claim is thrown out, which, on its face didn't seem, realistic or possible to me. I asked Alex to look at the claim, and I haven't read this full email, but I recall the response to that. The reality of that was not illegal citizens voting in the election. I think it was like overseas voters voting in the election. So obviously, people who were eligible to vote.
When these findings were passed up the chain to President Trump, he became frustrated and he replaced the campaign's legal team. Let's play clip 14.
I think the president, it was during the second week where things like you displayed were occurring, where he was, growing increasingly unhappy with, his team, me less so because I was less involved at this point, but still me, growing increasingly unhappy with Justin Clark. And that kind of, paved the way for, Justin to be moved out and Mayor Giuliani to be moved in as the person in charge of, the legal side of the campaign and for all intents and purposes, the campaign at that point.
Now, when Mr. Stepien became campaign manager, he was the second Trump campaign manager for the 2020 race, and there were only about 115 days until Election Day. So let's play the video.
I inherited a campaign that was, the day I was hired was, I believe, President Trump's low point in the 2020 daily average polling against President Biden. It was a campaign at a low point in the polls. It was structurally and fiscally deficient. There was a great deal wrong with the campaign in both of those areas. So most of my day spent fixing and I think I took over with 115 days left in the campaign. Most of my time spent fixing the things that could be fixed with 115 days left in the campaign.
Now, Mr. Stepien, has been in the campaign field for a long time, and he worked for lots of different candidates and campaigns. He testified to this committee about his concerns given the claims that Mr. Giuliani and Ms. Powell and their team were making publicly. Let's play clip 15.
Okay, and was it important for you, Mr. Stepien, to sort of pull back just for your own professional reputation? You didn't want to be associated with some of what you were hearing from the Giuliani team and others that sort of stepped in the wake of your departure?
I didn't mind being categorized. There were two groups of, we called them kind of my team and Rudy's team. I didn't mind being characterized as being part of Team Normal, as reporters, kind of started to do around that point in time. I said, hours ago, early on that, I've been doing this for a long time, 25 years, and I've spanned, political ideologies from Trump to McCain to Bush to Christie, and, I can work under a lot of circumstances for a lot of varied, candidates and politicians, but situation where, and I think along the way I've built up a pretty good, I hope, a good reputation for being honest and professional. And I didn't think what was happening was necessarily honest or professional at that point in time. So yeah, that led to me stepping away.
So the president did get rid of Team Normal, and I'd like to play a clip showing that the president found the people he needed to perpetuate his claims of fraud.
They saw a big truck bringing in 100,000 ballots in garbage cans, in waste paper baskets, in cardboard boxes, and in shopping baskets. And every single one of them was for Biden because they were being notified by Smartmatic in Frankfurt that Biden was way behind and they better come up with a lot more ballots. And we can prove every single thing I just said. If you gave me the paper ballots, I could probably turn around each one of these states. I'm absolutely convinced if you let me examine each one of those ballots, I pull out enough that were fraudulent that it would shake the hell out of the country.
It can set and run an algorithm that probably ran all over the country to take a certain percentage of votes from President Trump and flip them to President Biden, which we might never have uncovered had the votes for President Trump not been so overwhelming in so many of these states that it broke the algorithm.
I remember that one of the things Mark said at some point was, you can't show an actual vote was flipped, which I found at the time to be a remarkable assertion because you don't have to have the gun to see the body lying on the floor bleeding out with 5 bullet holes in it was killed by a gun.
What they were proposing, I thought was nuts. And the theory was also completely nuts, right? I mean, it was a combination of Italians, Germans. I mean, different things have been floating around as to who was involved. I remember Hugo Chavez and the Venezuelan. She has an affidavit from somebody who says they wrote a software in, it's something with the Philippines, and just all over the radar.
Did you ever share, Mr. Kushner, your view of Mr. Giuliani? Did you ever share your perspective about him with the president?
I guess, yes.
Tell me what you said.
Basically, not the approach I would take if I was you.
Okay, and how did he react? How did President Trump react when you shared that view with him?
We said, I have confidence in Rudy.
I think I had conversations with probably all of our council who are signed up to assist on election day as they disengaged with the campaign. The general consensus was that the law firms were not comfortable making the arguments that Rudy Giuliani was making publicly. I seem to recall that I had a similar conversation with most all of them.
I made it clear I did not agree with the idea of saying the election was stolen and putting out this stuff, which I told the president was bullshit. And, I didn't want to be a part of it. And that's one of the reasons that went into me deciding to leave when I did.
Even Sidney Powell, defending herself in a defamation lawsuit brought by Dominion Voting Systems, argued that, quote, no reasonable person would conclude that her statements were truly statements of fact. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the witness for joining us today. The first panel is now dismissed. Without objection, the chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lofgren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last week, we presented the testimony of former Attorney General Bill Barr, who testified before this committee. Today, we present additional evidence, including his testimony that former President Trump started making claims of election fraud immediately after the election, and that Barr concluded the claims were untrue. Now, due to the length of Attorney General Barr's testimony, we're only going to include relevant portions at the hearing today. So let's play the video.
The department, in fact, when we received specific and credible allegations of fraud, made an effort to look into these to satisfy ourselves that they were without merit. And I was in the posture of trying to figure out, there was an avalanche of all these allegations of fraud that built up over a number of days. And it was like playing whack-a-mole, because something would come out one day and then the next day it would be another issue. Also, I was influenced by the fact that all the early claims that I understood were completely bogus and silly, and usually based on complete misinformation. And so I didn't consider the quality of claims right out of the box to give me any, feeling that there was really substance here.
For the first time since the election, the Attorney General spoke personally with the President on November 23rd, and this was at the White House. Let's play the video, please.
So on November 23rd, I hadn't spoken to the president since the election. And in fact, as I said, since the middle of October, roughly. And it was a little getting awkward because obviously he had lost the election and I hadn't said anything to him. And so Cipollone said, I think it's time you come over here. And so I came over to meet with the president in the Oval Office, and Meadows and Cipollone were there. And the president, and this is leading up to this conversation with Kushner, the president said there had been major fraud, and that as soon as the facts were out, the results of the election would be reversed. And he went on this for quite a while, as he's prone to do. And then he got to something that I was expecting, which is to say that apparently the Department of Justice doesn't think that it has a role of looking into these fraud claims. And I said, that has to be the campaign that raises that with the state. The department doesn't take side in elections, and the department is not an extension of your legal team. And our role is to investigate fraud, and we'll look at something if it's specific, credible, and could have affected the outcome of the election. And we're doing that, and it's just not. They're just not meritorious. They're not panning out. And as I walked out of the Oval Office, Jared was there with Dan Scavino, who ran the president's social media, and who I thought was a reasonable guy and believe is a reasonable guy. And I said, how long is he going to carry on with this stolen election stuff? Where's this going to go? And by that time, Meadows had caught up with me, and leaving the office, and caught up to me and said that he said, look, I think that he's becoming more realistic and knows that there's a limit to how far he can take this. And then Jared said, yeah, we're working on this. We're working on it.
Even after his attorney general told him his claims of election fraud were false, President Trump continued to promote these claims.
I felt that things continued to deteriorate between the 23rd and the weekend of the 29th. And then on November 29th, he appeared on Maria Bartiromo's show, Sunday Futures, I believe it was. And he said that the department was missing in action.
Well, no, we had glitches where they moved thousands of votes from my account to Biden's account. And these are glitches. So they're not glitches, they're theft. They're fraud, absolute fraud. This election was over. And then they did dumps. They call them dumps, big, massive dumps in Michigan and Pennsylvania and all over. How the FBI and Department of Justice, I don't know, maybe they're involved, but how people are allowed to get away from this stuff with this stuff is unbelievable.
Now, spurred by what he saw, Barr told the Associated Press on December 1st that there was no evidence of election fraud. And immediately after Attorney General Barr's statement went public, Mr. Trump berated and he nearly fired Barr. But Barr persisted in telling the president that there was no evidence to support the fraud claims.
This got under my skin, but I also felt it was time for me to say something. So I set up a lunch with the AP reporter, Mike Balsamo, and I told him at lunch, I made this statement that to date we have not seen fraud on a scale that could have affected a different outcome in the election. I had a later meeting scheduled at the White House at 3:00 with Meadows. This was previously scheduled, so I knew this was going to come up, and I went over there and I told my secretary that I thought I would probably be fired and told not to go home. I mean, not to go back to my office. So I said, you might have to pack up for me. And so when I got over there, I met with the chief of staff. He said the president was angry. He didn't really get into the issue of the fraud. And then I went up to Pat Cipollone's office and we were talking with each other. And the word came down that he wanted us both to go to the Oval. And the president was as mad as I've ever seen him, and he was trying to control himself. And the president said, well, this is, killing me. You didn't have to say this. You must have said this because you hate Trump. You hate Trump. And then he raised the big vote dump, as he called it, in Detroit. And that, he said people saw boxes coming into the counting station at all hours of the morning and so forth. And I explained to him that at that point, I knew the exact number of precincts in Detroit. I think it was 630 something. I said, Mr. President, there are 630 precincts in Detroit. And unlike elsewhere in the state, they centralized the counting process. So they're not counted in each precinct. They're moved to counting stations. And so the normal process would involve boxes coming in at all different hours. So there's nothing. And I said, did anyone point out to you, did all the people complaining about it point out to you, you actually did better in Detroit than you did last time? I mean, there's no indication of fraud in Detroit. And I told him that the stuff that his people were shoveling out to the public was bullshit. I mean, that the claims of fraud were bullshit. And, he was indignant about that. And I reiterated that they'd wasted a whole month on these claims on the Dominion voting machines, and they were idiotic claims. And I specifically raised the Dominion voting machines, which I found to be among the most disturbing allegations, disturbing in the sense that I saw absolutely zero basis for the allegations, but they were made in such a sensational way that they obviously were influencing a lot of people, members of the public. that there was this systemic corruption in the system and that their votes didn't count and that these machines controlled by somebody else were actually determining it, which was complete nonsense. And it was being laid out there. And I told them that it was crazy stuff and they were wasting their time on that. And it was doing a grave disservice to the country.
Okay, so the very next day, the president released a video rehashing some of the very same claims that his chief law enforcement officer had told him were, quote, nonsense.
Here's an example. This is Michigan. At 6:31 in the morning, a vote dump of 149,772 votes came in unexpectedly. We were winning by a lot. That batch was received in horror. We have a company that's very suspect. Its name is Dominion. With the turn of a dial or the change of a chip, you can press a button for Trump and the vote goes to Biden. What kind of a system is this?
Barr again told the president that there was nothing to these claims on December 14th.
When I walked in, sat down, he went off on a monologue saying that there was now definitive evidence involving fraud through the Dominion machines. And a report had been prepared by a very reputable cybersecurity firm, which he identified as Allied Security Operations Group. And he held up the report, and then he asked that a copy of it be made for me. And while a copy was being made, he said, this is absolute proof that the Dominion machines were rigged. The report means that I'm going to have a second term. And then he gave me a copy of the report. And as he talked more and more about it, I sat there flipping through the report and looking through it. And to be frank, it looked very amateurish to me. Didn't have the credentials of the people involved, but I didn't see any real qualifications. And the statements were made very conclusory, like, these machines were designed to, engage in fraud or something to that effect, but I didn't see any supporting information for it. And I was somewhat demoralized because I thought, boy, if he really believes this stuff, he has, lost contact with he's become detached from reality if he really believes this stuff. On the other hand, when I went into this and would, tell him how crazy some of these allegations were, there was never an indication of interest in what the actual facts were. In my opinion then, and my opinion now, is that the election was not stolen by fraud. And I haven't seen anything since the election that changes my mind on that, including the 2000 Mules movie.
Well, maybe you can assess that 2000 Mules, and people are talking about that.
Well, I mean, just in a nutshell, I just think the GBI was unimpressed with it. And I was similarly unimpressed with it because I think I was holding my fire on that to see what the photographic evidence was, because I thought, well, hell, if they have a lot of photographs of the same person dumping a lot of ballots in different boxes, that's hard to explain. So I wanted to see what the photographic evidence was. But the cell phone data is singularly unimpressive. I mean, it basically, if you take 2 million cell phones and figure out where they are physically in a big city like Atlanta or wherever, just by definition, you're going to find many hundreds of them have passed by and spent time in the vicinity of these boxes. And the premise that if you go by a box, 5 boxes or whatever it was, that's a mule is just indefensible. It by definition, you're going to have hundreds of this. I mean, I saw one contractor said, we figured out that our truck alone would account for 6 cell phone signals. This was some kind of contractor, and our route would take us by these things on a regular basis. So but then when the movie came out, I think the photographic evidence in it was completely I mean, there was a little bit of it, but it was lacking. It didn't establish widespread illegal harvesting. The other thing is people don't understand is that it's not clear that even if you can show harvesting, that changes the results of the election. The courts are not going to throw out votes and then figure out what votes were harvested and throw them out. It's still the burden on the challenging party to show that illegal votes were cast. Votes were the result of undue influence or bribes, or there was really, the person was non-compos mentis. But absent that evidence, I just didn't see courts throwing out votes anyway. I felt that before the election, it was possible to talk sense to the president. And while you sometimes had to engage in, a big wrestling match with him, that it was possible to keep things on track. But I felt that after the election, he didn't seem to be listening, and I didn't think it was, that I was inclined not to stay around if he wasn't listening to advice from me or his other cabinet secretaries.
So on December 14th, Barr quit. Now, the Attorney General wasn't the only person who told the president that his claims were false. Other officials and close advisors told him the same thing.
Rather than try to address a counterfactual or a hypothetical, let me just say there were instances where the president would say, people are telling me this, or I've heard this, or I saw on television, this impropriety in Atlanta or Pennsylvania or something. And we were in a position to say, our people have already looked at that, and we know that you're getting bad information, that's not correct. It's been demonstrated to be incorrect from our point of view. It's been debunked.
A month and a half or so after the election day, and at that meeting, various allegations of fraud were discussed, and Eric and Pat didn't, told the group, the president included, that none of those allegations had been substantiated to the point where they could be the basis for any litigation challenge to the election.
President Trump's own vice president and his top advisors also knew that there wasn't evidence to support the claims that the president was making.
Anyone else other than Mr. Meadows who asked you about the status outside of your legal group, Mr. Morgan and the others you mentioned, anyone else who asked you the status of what you were finding in your assessment of it?
Yes, sir.
Who's that?
Peter Navarro.
When did you talk to Mr. Navarro?
Mid-November.
Around the same time as Mr. Meadows?
Yes, sir.
And tell me about that conversation.
I recall him asking me questions about Dominion and maybe some other categories of allegations of voter fraud. And I remember telling him that I didn't believe the Dominion allegations because I thought the hand recount in Georgia would resolve any issues with a technology problem and with Dominion or Dominion flipping votes. And I mentioned at that time that the CISA Chris Krebs had recently released a report saying that the election was secure. And I believe Mr. Navarro accused me of being an agent of the deep state working with Chris Krebs against the president. And I never took another phone call from Mr. Navarro.
Anyone else besides Mr. Meadows, Mr. Navarro, Mr. Hirschman that you had discussions with, inquiring about what you were finding in your review of the allegations that were pouring in?
I believe I had about a 15-second conversation with the vice president about it as well.
When was that?
During one of the visits to the White House. I don't know which one. I think it was the first one in November. I had met him briefly at the campaign, and he remembered me and saw me. And he asked what I was doing on the campaign, and I told him that, you know, we were looking into some of the issues related to voter fraud. And he asked me, I don't remember his exact words, but he asked me if we were finding anything. And I said that I didn't believe we were finding it, or I was not personally finding anything sufficient to alter the results of the election. And he thanked me. That was our interaction.
At a later hearing, you'll hear live testimony from the former acting Deputy Attorney General of the Department of Justice, Rich Donahue. But now I'd like to play a portion of his testimony.
I tried to, again, put this in perspective and to try to put it in very clear terms to the president. And I said something to the effect of, sir, we've done dozens of investigations, hundreds of interviews. The major allegations are not supported by the evidence developed. We've looked at Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Nevada. We're doing our job. Much of the info you're getting is false. And then I went into, for instance, this thing from Michigan, this report about 68% error rate. Reality is it was only 0.0063% error rate, less than 1 in 15,000. So the president accepted that. He said, okay, fine, but what about the others? And again, this gets back to the point that there were so many of these allegations that when you gave him a very direct answer on one of them, he wouldn't fight us on it, but he would move to another allegation. So then I talked about a little bit about the Pennsylvania truck driver. This is another allegation that had come up. And this claim was by a truck driver who believed, perhaps honestly, that he had transported an entire tractor trailer truck full of ballots from New York to Pennsylvania. And this was, again, out there in the public and discussed. And I essentially said, look, we looked at that allegation, both the people who load the truck and the people who unload the truck. And that allegation was not supported by the evidence. Again, he said, okay. And then he said, no, I didn't mention that one. What about the others? And I said, okay, well, with regard to Georgia, we looked at the tape, we interviewed the witnesses. There is no suitcase. The president kept fixating on this suitcase that supposedly had fraudulent ballots and that the suitcase was rolled out from under the table. And I said, no, sir, there is no suitcase. You can watch that video over and over. There is no suitcase. There is a wheeled bin where they carry the ballots, and that's just how they move ballots around that facility. There's nothing suspicious about that at all. I told them that there was no multiple scanning of the ballots. One part of that allegation was that they were taking one ballot and scanning it through 3 or 4 or 5 times to rack up votes, presumably for Vice President Biden. I told them that the video did not support that. Then he went off on double voting, the top of the next page. He said, dead people are voting. Indians are getting paid to vote. He meant people on Native American reservations. He said there's lots of fraud going on here. Told him flat out that much of the information he's getting is false and or just not supported by the evidence. We look at the allegations, but they don't pan out.
Mr. Barr and his advisors were not the only ones who determined that the president's allegations regarding Dominion voting machines were false. So, Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to include in the record of this hearing reports issued by the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, otherwise known as CISA, that addressed and rejected the claims of manipulation of voting machines in the 2020 election.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also ask unanimous consent to include in the record a report prepared by the Michigan Senate Oversight Committee that disproved claims of election fraud in Michigan, as well as a statement by 59 of the country's leading election security scientists, noting the absence of any credible evidence that the 2020 election had been altered through technical compromise, and 5 other reports from organizations and individuals confirming there was no widespread fraud in the 2020 election or describing the spread of the former president's lies.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Pursuant to the order of the committee for today, the chair declares the committee in recess for a period of approximately 10 minutes.
Well, that was very interesting. You know, it's different to watch this hearing with a group of people. It actually adds to it, the conversations that are going on. But based on what you saw, what do you guys want to talk about? And does anybody want me to drop the link to actually speak on it? Because I will. Hopefully, the sound is good, not too loud. If I'm busting your eardrums, let me know. But basically, when you hear that they had many committees checking into this, whenever they started speaking about voter fraud, about the machines being faulty, about the company being corrupt, of course, nobody just sat still and listened to these allegations and didn't do anything about it. His own team were investigating. Okay, the election committee started investigating. Outside committees were organized to investigate on it. And all of it came up negative. And all of that was reported back to the Republicans, back to all the politicians, and back to the White House, Trump, all his staff. He refused to listen. He stayed on the same narrative. That's what he wanted out there. It's almost as if he was just running a PR campaign. You know, of course, I mean, in my humble opinion, that's what it was the whole time. And, you know, some of you, Kyle, for instance, has brought up a very good point, Kyle's Goldfish State. What would happen if we did overturn the election? Would not all those Republicans that got voted back in be up for grabs again? Because he's the only one who lost on the ticket as far as Republicans. Yeah, you know, actually, I'm telling you, Dominion had every right to sue for defamation the people that came out there and spoke against them without facts. When they had committees proving there was nothing, they had a lot to back them up. And to just go against the evidence and just to keep speaking on it like that, they should have been held accountable. You know, yeah. I know they found nothing but Mike eat a pillow. I know that's like exactly. But you know, Mikey, they just it puts in my mind, that every time I hear the ex-president speak on this issue, it is like he's in a commercial for himself or repeatedly. Before he even got into politics, when he was on television and he was a businessman, he would do the same thing. He didn't care what anybody else says. He wants what he wants, and this is just the way he operates, Well, many of the people around him are like, certifiable. You would have to be to only do what the one man says, regardless of where it stands on right or wrong, or up or down, left or right. You'd have to be a little nuts, But in our country, money and promises, and fame, all of that. Watching him run this presidency as if it was a dictatorship is uncomfortable, embarrassing, infuriating. But that is how he did it. And everybody who worked with him ended up, pretty much you were with him or you were out. He's had more changes of staff than anyone I've ever seen. We never knew who was in there doing what. He gutted offices, never replaced people. He brought the government and the whole machine to a standstill. Well, it is true. My friend High Inquisitor is having some electrical issues. They're working on his street and they took his power down. I think it's Trump. Actually, he didn't like his views. Well, there's that. No, I kid. I just, he's just having some issues. Perhaps he'll be back for the afternoon session. We're only on a 10-minute break. I don't know how long this is going to go today, but I'm happy to keep it up with you all as long as you want to talk about it and watch it as a group. Much more fun to get frustrated together, isn't it? Than it is to yell at your television alone at home. I know I enjoy it a little bit more having you all here to witness it with me and to talk about it as it goes on, because yelling at my TV was why I haven't watched TV in almost a year and a half. Yeah, because of the elections, because of all of that. Gets to be too much. Way too much. After votes, I don't know. Faulty says, I just thought of the irony of people storming the Capitol, yelling USA, USA, while they're literally breaking down the system of the US. I know the irony, right? Like, what did they think they were going to accomplish? Like, I don't even know what the end goal was there. I never understood it. I still don't, no matter how much people try to explain it to me. Alice, I am dropping it because I'll be happy to have you come up. Anyone who wants to come up for a few minutes, we'll keep it short. Well, you're more than welcome. I trust you all to be reasonable, respectful people, as I've known in the other chats. So come on up there, Alice. It is very, I agree. I agree so much that it's very, very important. Autistic Shield and Kyle's Goldfish are talking about voting is so much more important now than it's ever been. I mean, it's always been really important, but as our country is changing, and I don't know about you all, how many Americans are here in the chat, I feel it. I feel a little bit of a change. As hopeless as I felt, as disheartened as it's been, frustrating, anger, just beyond thinking I could do anything about it. I see a little bit of hope, in some of the speeches and some of the comments that I'm hearing from Republicans, from many on different sides. Welcome, Alice. May I call you Alice? Yeah.
Hiya.
Well, welcome. Thanks
you.
for joining me. So what do you want to say about it besides all me talking? What would you like to say about this book?
I mean, it's just, you've had all these Republicans who are screaming and shouting about the election being fraudulent and everything like that. But every one of them were quite happy with the voting system when they were winning their primaries or their states or something like that. It's the exact same voting system, so how can it be fraudulent for Trump in the 2020 but be all right for them? That's what annoyed me a lot about the whole thing.
Exactly, because here it is. He's saying that everything was it was all wrong. All the votes are wrong. Everything's all break, and yet so many Republicans were voted in. Does he not realize if he overturned the whole thing that everybody would be out? Like they would have to start all over again. In his own party would have lost the Senate, and you know, I just I don't understand. It's obvious that he was only out for himself, but. Having experience with the man before he ran for president, I would say that that's a true statement. This man is always only out for himself. No one, yeah, he doesn't favor anyone but himself. Yeah, so any party that supported him had to realize the danger that he was going to do whatever he wanted.
But it's still even now though, Claire, that some Republicans are still that far up his butt that they can't see what's right in front of them, you know?
Well, in a way, I kind of understand that. I don't support it, okay? But in looking at it clearly for what it is, he is a super salesman, is he not? I mean, he could sell ice to an Eskimo. Look what he's accomplished. He ran a bullshit campaign with no platform. He didn't do anything that he said he was going to do in those 4 years he was in office, except for dismantle everything. He did not accomplish not one single campaign goal, except for chaos. Okay. And that wasn't even on the ballot. But however, so many people still believe in him and still voted him for a second term, which is astounding to me because, you know, you look at what they did. You say, okay, I'll take a chance on you, any politician, and you vote them in, and then you watch what they do. They watch what campaign promises they keep. And you know, we know they're not going to keep them all, but at least talk about why, or at least move towards why you've changed your mind, why it can't be done, you know, have the conversations. No, none of that. Just went on like none of it happened. Like anything that came out of his mouth, he can't be held accountable for because he really looks at it all as just a sales campaign. PR. Yeah. He is very good at PR. This man is a charlatan.
Yeah, but that's where he should have stayed though, Claire. You know what I mean? That's where he should have stayed. He should have stayed in business. I mean, when I learned that he actually got in, and got voted in, I was like, are you people crazy? Yeah. You know, he's voted him in, it's going to be even harder to get him out because he has personality and everything like that. I knew that this was coming, you know, that he was going to put out the fraudulent stuff and everything like that if he wasn't winning, because he's that type of man that everybody's got to bow down to him, you know what I mean? Do what he says and everything like that. And it's just crazy the way these Republicans and everything like that. I mean, the maddest one out of them all is that Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean, I don't know how that woman got voted in the first place.
I don't know. It just goes to show you that anybody can run for politics. To anyone, like it doesn't matter. It's like anyone can. Which is why we should all get more involved, because obviously anyone can. Okay, so like we need more common sense people in there, but it is hard. It's an uphill battle. You know, it is quite. It's politics, and it's kind of like we all think of lawyers too. Like we all think of them the same way, like a little bit. Although I have great respect for the law, you know that part of their job is to convince you of things you don't want to be convinced of, right? To convince you of things that might not be right. And so to be a politician, we all look at it like, oh, you know, that's a shady business anyway. So if they lie, we don't hold them accountable anymore. We kind of almost expect it. And here's the thing, like what he says in a way is kind of true. Y'all just mad because I was better at the bullshit than the rest of you. And this is true. He is excellent at the bullshit. He totally is. Okay. And it is true. And we have to take it on the chin for that. He played the game better than us because we were all expecting everybody to follow the rules in his politics. And apparently there are no rules. And that's the system we live in right now. And it's very unfortunate. But I don't want to vote for people that don't want to follow the rules, you know? So it's like a catch-22, you know?
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
makes it very hard as an American to figure out the right thing to do and where to go. And so most people, and which has been used against this country greatly over the last, I'd say 12 years, is that they will use our angst, our anger, or frustration, and our hopelessness against us and just wield it like that because they know it's our vote that they need. Okay, they do need the vote still. And I think that he spoke. Trump has spoken about corruption in the voting system because I think it really was.
Committee will be in order.
Later.
I now welcome our second panel of witnesses. We're joined today by B.J. Pack, Al Smith, and Ben Ginsberg. Mr. Pack is the former United States Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia. Mr. Smith is a former city commissioner for the city of Philadelphia, where he served for more than 10 years. Mr. Ginsberg is one of the leading election law attorneys in the country and has represented Republican presidential candidates in election litigation dating back to 2000, where he represented George W. Bush in the Bush v. Gore litigation. I will now swear in our witnesses. Please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm on the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God. Thank you. Please be seated. Let the record reflect the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Pursuant to Section 5C8 of House Resolution 503, I now recognize the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lofgren, for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before the break, I think you all heard Mr. Barr and Mr. Donahue talk about the false claims that Mr. Trump and his supporters made about suitcases of fake ballots in Georgia. We have a witness here today who thoroughly investigated that issue. Mr. Pack, I want to thank you for appearing before us today. You were appointed by President Trump to serve as the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia, and you served from 2017 until January of 2021. You were the lead federal prosecutor there and worked for the Department of Justice under then Attorney General Bill Barr. Now, were you ever asked by Attorney General Barr to investigate claims of voter fraud in the 2020 election? And if so, what were those claims?
Thank you, Congressman Lofgren. Thank you for the question. Approximately December 4th, I believe, of 2020, Attorney General Barr and I had a conversation about an unrelated case to the case at issue. At the end of the conversation, Mr. Barr had asked me if I had seen a certain videotape that was being reported in the news where Mr. Giuliani, in a Senate subcommittee hearing that was held the day before, May 3rd, showed a videotape of a purportedly a security tape at the State Farm Arena in Atlanta, which is also in Fulton County in the city of Atlanta. Yes. At the time, Mr. Barr asked me that he had made a public statement that he had not seen any widespread election fraud that would question the outcome of the election. And because of the videotape and the serious allegation that Mr. Giuliani was making with respect to the suitcase full of ballots purported in the video, he asked me to find out what I could about it, because he had envisioned that in some days after our call that he was going to go to the White House for a meeting, and then that issue might come up. He asked me to make it a priority to get to the bottom of, to try to substantiate the allegation made by Mr. Giuliani.
Thank you. I understand the Georgia Secretary of State's office investigated those State Farm Arena allegations and didn't find any evidence of fraud. What did you find when your office conducted its own investigation?
We found that the suitcase full of ballots, the alleged black suitcase that was being seen pulled from under the table was actually an official lockbox where ballots were kept safe. We found out that there was a mistake in terms of this misunderstanding that they were done counting ballots or tallying ballots for the night, and the partisan watchers that was assigned by each of the respective parties were announced to send home. Well, once they realized the mistake, someone from the Secretary of State's office had indicated that, no, we're not done for the night. You need to go ahead and continue counting. So once they packed up the lockbox full of ballots, they brought back the official ballot box again and continue to tally the ballots from the lockbox. Unfortunately, during the Senate hearing, Mr. Giuliani only played a clip that showed them pulling out the official ballot box from under the table and referring to that as a smoking gun of a fraud in Fulton County. But in actuality, in review of the entire video, it showed that that was actually an official ballot box that was kept underneath the tables. And then we saw them pack up because of the announcement that they thought they were done for the night. And then once the announcement was made that you should continue counting, they brought the ballot box back out and they continued to count. The FBI interviewed the individuals that are depicted in the videos that purportedly were double, triple counting of the ballots, and determined that nothing irregular happened in the counting, and the allegations made by Mr. Giuliani were false.
Thank you very much. I'd like to play again a testimony from Mr. Donahue, who appeared before the committee before today.
Mr. Donahue, we talked at some length about whether or not the White House or the president was informed about the Antrim report. On the results of the investigations, the interviews that have gone on Fulton County, how would those results have been communicated to the White House, to the president?
I don't know how they were initially communicated. I do know that they came up in subsequent conversations with the president, and Dag Rose and I essentially told him, we looked into that and it's just not true.
Okay, so he was informed.
I told the president myself that several times in several conversations, that these allegations about ballots being smuggled in a suitcase and run through the machine several times, it was not true. That we looked at the video, we interviewed the witnesses, it was not true.
Mr. Pack, after you left the U.S. Attorney's Office on January 4th, 2021, did the next U.S. Attorney there, I think Mr. Trump's personal pick, Bobby Christine, did he investigate any remaining claims of fraud? And if so, did he find any evidence that supported the president's claims of voter fraud?
It is my understanding that Mr. Christine continued any investigations that were pending at the time of my departure, but he was unable to find any evidence of fraud that affected the outcome of the election.
So after investigating the president's and Mr. Giuliani's claims about voter fraud in Georgia, is it your view today that there was no evidence of widespread fraud sufficient to undermine confidence in the outcome of the election in Georgia?
That is correct.
Thank you, Mr. Pack. And I want to thank you also for the service that you've given to our country. We appreciate that. Next, I'd like to turn to President Trump's false allegations about election integrity in Philadelphia. The Attorney General discussed these allegations at some length.
You know, the idea, the president has repeatedly suggested that there was some kind of outpouring of unexpected votes in inner city areas like Philadelphia. As recently as January 13th, when he walked off the NPR set, he was asked by the interviewer, what's your evidence of fraud? And he said more people voted in Philadelphia than there were voters. And that was absolute rubbish. The turnout in Philadelphia was in line with the state's turnout. And in fact, it was not as impressive as many suburban counties. And there was nothing strange about the Philadelphia turnout. It wasn't like there was all these unexpected votes that came out in Philadelphia. So, I think once you actually look at the votes, and then there's an obvious explanation. for example, in Pennsylvania, Trump ran weaker than the Republican ticket generally. He ran weaker than two of the state candidates. He ran weaker than the congressional delegation running for federal Congress, and he ran weaker than the Republican, I think. I haven't looked at this recently, but he generally was a weak element on the Republican ticket. So that does not suggest that the election was stolen by fraud.
How about Pennsylvania and Bill McSwain? We were talking to the U.S. Attorney in Philadelphia about an alleged discrepancy between the number of absentee ballots issued and the number of ballots cast.
Right. So that was one of the big ones for a period of time. I think that was raised at Gettysburg by Giuliani or something like that, but it kept on being repeated, and I found it annoying because it didn't seem that it was right. So I called McSwain, and he got back to me. He said, no, the problem is that Mastriano threw out this number. And what he did was he mixed apples and oranges. He took the number of applications for the Republican primary and he compared it to the number of absentee votes cast in the general election. But once you actually go and look and compare apples to apples, there's no discrepancy at all. And, that's one of I think at some point I covered that with the president.
We have another witness here today who has detailed knowledge about the election process in Philadelphia. Mr. Schmidt, at the time of the 2020 presidential election, you were serving as the only Republican member of Philadelphia's 3-member city commission, which is responsible for overseeing elections throughout the city. Is that correct?
That's correct, Congressperson.
So President Trump made numerous claims regarding fraudulent voting practices in Philadelphia, including the claim that dead people were voting. In fact, Mr. Giuliani told Pennsylvania state legislators that 8,000 dead people voted in Pennsylvania. You investigated those claims of voter fraud. Can you tell us what you found?
Not only was there not evidence of 8,000 dead voters voting in Pennsylvania, there wasn't evidence of 8. We took seriously every case that was referred to us, no matter how fantastical, no matter how absurd, and took every one of those seriously, including these.
As it turns out, even Mr. Trump's campaign lawyers knew that the dead voter claims weren't valid.
I guess the crooks in Philadelphia are disappointed in this. They only submitted 8,021 ballots from dead people, mail-in ballots for dead people. Probably easier for dead people to submit mail-in ballots than it is to vote in person.
Rudy was at this stage of his life and the same ability to manage things at this level or not. And obviously, I think Bernie Kerik publicly said it. They never proved the allegations that they were making, and they were trying to develop.
Mr. Schmidt, on November 11th, 2020, President Trump tweeted about you saying, and here's a quote, "A guy named Alan Schmidt, a Philadelphia commissioner and so-called Republican or rhino, is being used big time by the fake news media to explain how honest things were with respect to the election in Philadelphia. He refuses to look at a mountain of corruption, dishonesty. We win." As a result of that tweet and the CNN interview you gave where you stated the dead voter claims in Pennsylvania were false, you and your staff were subjected to disturbing threats. Can you tell us about that?
The threats prior to that tweet, and on some level it feels almost silly to talk about a tweet, but we can really see the impact that they have, because prior to that, the threats were pretty general in nature. Corrupt election officials in Philadelphia are going to get what's coming to them. You're what the Second Amendment is for. You're walking into the lion's den, all sorts of things like that. After the president tweeted at me by name, calling me out the way that he did, the threats became much more specific, much more graphic, and included not just me by name, but included members of my family, by name, their ages, our address, pictures of our home, just every bit of detail that you could imagine. That was what changed with that tweet.
Behind me are redacted threats that you received, that you provided to the committee. Now, we redacted portions of the text to protect your family. Mr. Schmidt, I think I speak for all of my colleagues when I say we are deeply sorry for what you and your loved ones have been through. And I also want to thank you for your service to your country and for standing up for the rule of law. I want to thank both Mr. Pack and Mr. Schmidt for their service, their testimony, and for standing up for the rule of law. Now I'd like to turn to another subject. The courts in our country provide a legitimate venue for campaigns to challenge what they view as irregular election practices. Now, courts have the final say on how the law applies to those challenges. We have a renowned legal expert here to address the Trump campaign's activities in court. Mr. Ginsburg, you've spent your entire career representing Republicans in election-related litigation. You served as the National Counsel on Republican presidential campaigns in 2000, in 2004, and in 2012. You played a key role in the 2000 Florida recount that led to the Supreme Court's decision in Bush v. Gore. You served as the co-chair of the Presidential Commission on Election Administration. I think it's fair to say you're the most prominent Republican lawyer who's litigated in the election field. Now, you've analyzed the Trump campaign's litigation pretty carefully. What's the normal process for post-election litigation? How is the Trump campaign's different from the kinds of post-election litigation you've been involved in and know about?
In the normal course of things, any campaign on the night of the election and the days after will do a couple of different things. One is that they'll analyze precinct results to look for abnormalities in the results, and they'll send people to those precincts to ask more questions. Secondly, all campaigns will have poll watchers and poll workers and observers in the polling place. And so campaigns will talk to those people if they saw any irregularities that could cause problems in the election. Now, the Trump campaign talked pre-election about having 50,000 poll workers. So presumably, they did have eyes on the ground in all these places. And so in the normal course of things, a campaign will analyze the reports that come in. Trump campaign had a couple of basic problems, however. Number one, the 2020 election was not close. In 2000, that was 537 and close. In this election, the most narrow margin was 10,000 and something in Arizona, and you just don't make up those sorts of numbers in recounts. And when the claims of fraud and irregularities were made, you've heard very compelling testimony from Mr. Stepien, from Matt Morgan, from Alex Cannon about those claims and how they didn't believe them. And so that put the Trump campaign on sort of a process of bringing cases without the actual evidence that you have to have in which the process is designed to bring out.
So are you aware of any instance in which a court found the Trump campaign's fraud claims to be credible?
No, there was never that instance. In all the cases that were brought, and I've looked at the more than 60 that include more than 180 counts. And no, the simple fact is that the Trump campaign did not make its case.
The Select Committee has identified 62 post-election lawsuits filed by the Trump campaign and his allies between November 4th, 2020 and January 6th, 2021. Those cases resulted in 61 losses and only a single victory, which actually didn't affect the outcome for either candidate. Despite those 61 losses, President Trump and his allies claim that the courts refused to hear them out and as a result, they never had their day in court. Mr. Ginsburg, what do you say about the claims that Mr. Trump wasn't given an opportunity to provide the evidence they had of voter fraud? Did they in fact, did they have their day in court?
They did have their day in court. About half of those cases that you mentioned were dismissed at the procedural stage for a lack of standing. The proper people didn't bring the case, or there wasn't sufficient evidence and it got dismissed on a motion to dismiss. But in the other, there was discussion of the merits that was contained in the complaints. And in no instance did a court find that the charges of fraud were real. And it's also worth noting that even if the Trump campaign complained that it did not have its day in court, there have been post-election reviews in each of the 6 battleground states that could have made a difference. And those ranged from the somewhat farcical Cyber Ninjas case in Arizona to the Michigan Senate report that was mentioned earlier, the hand recount in Georgia that Mr. Pack addressed. And in each one of those instances, there was no credible evidence of fraud produced by the Trump campaign or his supporters.
Thank you. You know, as Mr. Ginsburg has explained, there are no cases where the Trump campaign was able to convince a court that there was widespread fraud or irregularities in the 2020 election. Over and over, judges appointed by Democrats and Republicans alike directly rebutted this false narrative. They called out the Trump campaign's lack of evidence for its claims, and the judges did that even in cases where they could have simply thrown out the lawsuit without writing a word. You can see behind me a few excerpts from the decisions in these 62 cases. The Trump campaign's lack of evidence was criticized by judges across the political spectrum. In Pennsylvania, a Trump-appointed judge concluded, quote, "Charges require specific allegations and proof. We have neither here." Another Trump-appointed judge warned that if cases like these succeeded, quote, "Any disappointed loser in a presidential election able to hire a team of clever lawyers could flag claim deviations from election results and cast doubt on election results." The list goes on and on. Allegations are called, quote, "an amalgamation of theories, conjecture, and speculation." In another, strained legal arguments without merit, unsupported by evidence, derived from wholly unreliable sources, a fundamental and obvious misreading of the Constitution. The rejection of President Trump's litigation efforts was overwhelming. 22 federal judges appointed by Republican presidents, including 10 appointed by President Trump himself, and at least 24 elected or appointed Republican state judges dismiss the president's claims. At least 11 lawyers have been referred for disciplinary proceedings due to bad faith and baseless efforts to undermine the outcome of the 2020 presidential election. Rudy Giuliani had his license to practice law suspended in New York. And just this week, a newly filed complaint will potentially make his suspension from practicing law in DC permanent. And as we've just heard from perhaps the most preeminent Republican election lawyer in recent history, the Trump campaign's unprecedented effort to overturn its election loss in court was a deeply damaging abuse of the judicial process. As stated by U.S. District Court Judge David Carter, this was, quote, "a coup in search of a legal theory." Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I want to thank our witnesses for joining us today. The members of the Select Committee may have additional questions for today's witnesses, and we ask that you respond expeditiously in writing to those questions. Without objection, members will be permitted 10 business days to submit statements for the record, including opening remarks and additional questions for the witnesses. The second panel of witnesses is now dismissed. Without objection, the chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lofgren, for a closing statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now that we understand the litigation efforts by President Trump and his allies, I'd like to present additional actions taken by the Trump campaign during this time. President Trump continued to push the stolen election narrative, even though he and his allies knew that their litigation efforts, making the same claim, had failed. It's worth pointing out that litigation generally does not continue past the safe harbor date of December 14th. But the fact that this litigation went on, well, that decision makes more sense when you consider the Trump campaign's fundraising tactics. Because if the litigation had stopped on December 14th, there would have been no fight to defend the election and no clear path to continue to raise millions of dollars. Mr. Chairman, at this time, I'd ask for unanimous consent to include in the record a video presentation describing how President Trump used the lies he told to raise millions of dollars from the American people. These fundraising schemes were also part of the effort to disseminate the false claims of election fraud.
Without objection, so
My name is Amanda Wick, and I'm Senior Investigative Counsel with the House Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol. Between Election Day and January 6th, the Trump campaign sent millions of fundraising emails to Trump supporters, sometimes as many as 25 a day. The emails claimed the, quote, left-wing mob was undermining the election, implored supporters to, quote, step up to protect the integrity of the election, and encouraged them to, quote, fight back. But as the Select Committee has demonstrated, the Trump campaign knew these claims of voter fraud were false, yet they continued to barrage small dollar donors with emails, encouraging them to donate to something called the Official Election Defense Fund. The Select Committee discovered no such fund existed.
I don't believe there is actually a fund called the Election Defense Fund.
Is it fair to say the Election Defense Fund was another, I think we called it a marketing tactic?
Yes.
And tell us about these funds as marketing tactics.
Just a topic matter where money could potentially go to be, how money could potentially be used.
The claims that the election was stolen were so successful, President Trump and his allies raised $250 million, nearly $100 million in the first week after the election. On November 9th, 2020, President Trump created a separate entity called the Save America PAC. Most of the money raised went to this newly created PAC, not to election-related litigation. The Select Committee discovered that the Save America PAC made millions of dollars of contributions to pro-Trump organizations, including $1 million to Trump Chief of Staff Mark Meadows' charitable foundation, $1 million to the America First Policy Institute, a conservative organization which employs several former Trump administration officials, $204,857 to the Trump Hotel Collection, and over $5 million to Event Strategies, Inc., the company that ran President Trump's January 6th rally on the Ellipse.
All of us here today do not want to see our election victory stolen by emboldened radical left Democrats, which is what they're doing.
The evidence developed by the Select Committee highlights how the Trump campaign aggressive false election claims to fundraise, telling supporters it would be used to fight voter fraud that did not exist. The emails continued through January 6th, even as President Trump spoke on the Ellipse. 30 minutes after the last fundraising email was sent, the Capitol was breached.
Every American is entitled and encouraged to participate in our electoral process. Political fundraising is part of that. Small dollar donors use scarce disposable income to support candidates and causes of their choosing, to make their voices heard. And those donors deserve the truth about what those funds will be used for. Throughout the committee's investigation, we found evidence that the Trump campaign and its surrogates misled donors as to where their funds would go and what they would be used for. So not only was there the big lie, there was the big ripoff. Donors deserve to know where their funds are really going. They deserve better than what President Trump and his team did. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Without objection, the chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Ms. Cheney, for a closing statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I would like to thank all of our witnesses today. And I'd also like to, in particular, wish Mr. Stepien and his family all the best on the arrival of a new baby. Today's hearing, Mr. Chairman, was very narrowly focused. And in the coming days, you will see the committee move on to President Trump's broader planning for January 6th, including his plan to corrupt the Department of Justice and his detailed planning with lawyer John Eastman to pressure the vice president, state legislatures, state officials, and others to overturn the election. Let me leave you today with one clip to preview what you will see in one of our hearings to come. This is the testimony of White House lawyer Eric Hirschman. John Eastman called Mr. Hirschman the day after January 6th, and here is how that conversation went.
I said to him, "Are you out of your effing mind?" Right? I said, I only want to hear two words coming out of your mouth from now on: orderly transition.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
At the conclusion of last week's hearing, we showed you a video of rioters explaining why they had come to Washington on January 6th. It was because Donald Trump told them to be here. Today, we heard about some of the lies Donald Trump embraced and amplified when it became clear he didn't have the numbers of votes to win the election. We heard about how officials at different levels of government explored claims of fraud and found no evidence. Yet the former president continued to repeat those false claims over and over again. Today, we'll end things where we did on Thursday, back on January 6th, hearing words of individuals who wanted to stop the transfer of power. We know they were there because of Donald Trump. Now we hear some of the things they believed. Without objection, I enter into the record a video presentation.
I know exactly what's going on right now. Fake election. They think they're gonna fucking cheat us out of our vote and put communist fucking Biden in office. It ain't fucking happening today, buddy. You voted?
Yes, sir.
How'd it go?
Voted early. It went well, except for can't really trust the software. Dominion software all over.
We voted, and right in the top right-hand corner of the Dominion voting machine that we used, there was a Wi-Fi symbol with 5 bars. So that most definitely connected to the internet, without a doubt. So they stole that from us twice. We're not doing it anymore. We're not taking it anymore. So we're standing up, we're here, and whatever happens, we're not laying down again.
I'm from Pennsylvania. It didn't work. It actually worked. It didn't work. No. Trust the system. 200,000 people that weren't even registered voted. 430,000 votes disappeared from President Trump's tally. And you can't stand there and tell me that it worked.
I don't want to say that what we're doing is right. But if the election's being stolen, what is it going to take?
The chair requests those in the hearing room remain seated until the Capitol Police have escorted members from the room. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.
Oh, well. I don't know about you all, but that was something. And I do appreciate them not going till 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock. But the way they're laying it out is quite tenable. It's actually digestible. They're not overwhelming us with long, tedious depositions. The videos help. The statements from others that were taken during interviews help to add to the dialogue. I think they're doing an excellent job of getting the proper information out. I don't know how you guys feel. I dropped the link in case anybody wants to come up. Alice, what do you think after all that testimony for today?
I think the way that they're actually setting it out, you know, bit by bit, as you say, they're not overwhelming you with information. You know, they're kind of doing it in a sort of strategic. To me, it's like, right, we'll answer all the questions that everybody's had. You know, why didn't this happen? How did this happen? When did it happen? And they're kind of breaking that down. So they're starting off with how it all came about, you know, who was in contact with who, who was telling the Trump what at that time, and things like that. So if that's the way that they're going to continue doing it, I think it's going to be quite interesting how they get the points across to the actual public. If they keep doing it the way they're doing it, I think it might change some people's minds. I don't think it's going to change everybody's minds, because there'll be people out there already saying, "Oh no, this is a lie, that's a lie." You know, they're just like your Republicans. You know, they'll be saying they're just attacking us and they're just trying to do this, and you know. But the way they've done it now, it's quite. It's really good in my opinion for what I've seen so far.
Just laying it out there, especially some of the people at the end that they are actually interviewing that were part of the process have already been prosecuted and given statements as to who was involved and which actually helped move this committee forward with the information to be able to even form the committee once those statements came forward of who was actually involved, who were the players, you know, where the information was coming from and why they were there to begin with. Because when it actually happened right afterwards, there was a lot of blame placed on them for other organizations, lots of terroristic United States organizations that aren't actually labeled terroristic yet, although they do terroristic things, in my opinion. There was a lot of blame put on Antifa, blame put on the Proud Boys, blame put on everybody. But nothing about the politicians who actually organized this until later. So I'm happy that they are actually giving valid, truthful statements because they got nothing left to lose now. I'm happy to see Giuliani being held to task. He's under investigation. He shouldn't be a lawyer. He's been actually acting. I mean, he was on 9/11 mayor, and at that time, I thought he did such a great job. And to watch him fall on the wrong side of things for so long, and I don't mean just politically, I just mean on poor choices of representation and speech and backing lies that he knows are lies, that he knows better. It's been very disheartening, you know, to watch the fall. But actually, I think he needs to be held accountable for, and I'm waiting for these charges to come through on him because his misrepresentation when he absolutely knew better is really.
He was one of the biggest mouthpieces when it came to the election being fraud and everything like that, and it was him that was. I mean, for what I've seen, it was him that was mostly in Trump's ear. Even though Bill Barr and that saying that he told Trump this and he told Trump that, I guarantee that Giuliani was in his ear going, no, he's just saying this and they're just saying that, and you go ahead and do this, you've got a legal right, you know, and kind of gain him on the legal not gain him the proper legal ramifications that could come of this, but encouraging him to say that the election was fraud.
Yeah. There they are. So I just want to take a moment to thank you, Godless, for joining us. I was hoping you would, because I know that you like to delve into this as much as I do on your side. So welcome.
It's interesting. It's interesting looking at it as an outsider. It is actually very interesting. And I totally agree. I said in the chat that, as far as I'm concerned, Giuliani is as guilty as Trump.
Exactly.
In my opinion.
Did you
And
get the
you know,
article I sent you? Did you see where they're at with the prosecution? That was current as of April, the end of April.
I haven't read that actually,
Okay.
but yeah, I totally stand by that. That he is guilty as Trump in this. There's no two ways about this. But this is just so interesting that it's. I mean, it is. It's very, very clear here that the whole premise of this thing that Trump was going on for months about fraud is just bullshit. I mean, we all knew it was, but I don't know. I mean, this is to like though. They just it seems to just be immune to evidence.
Yeah. If it doesn't fit their narrative, unfortunately, that is true. It's a well-oiled PR team. It's a well-funded, when I mean oiled, I mean well-funded political machine at this point. And the thing that with Giuliani is that he also has a legal profession. He's got to answer to the Bar Association too for his behaviors.
He became famous as the guy who prosecuted the mafia, wasn't he? That's how he kind of became famous.
Exactly. And then he was our 9/11 mayor. That was a terrible time for our country. And he got us through that. We all thought he was wonderful. On both sides, Democrats, Republicans, everybody came out in support of Rudy Giuliani. And Aaron's right. If he never met Trump, the man would have died a hero. History intact for all the good that he did, but he's kind of like ruined it. It's very hard to balance the man we see now with the man from then. It's almost impossible. It's like it's two different people. Welcome back, Quiz. Are you able to talk at all? No, maybe not. He's having internet troubles where he is also. They're tearing up his street and messing with his connection. So it's funny how now we make parallels to Boris to Trump, and the one that I make the most commonly is actually a funny one. Their hair. They both have the worst hair I've ever seen on a politician.
I mean, there are similarities and there are differences as well. But I mean, in terms of being a sort of someone who thinks people who think that the rules don't apply to them, even if they're the ones making the rules. Yes. There is a lot of similarities between Boris Johnson and Donald Trump.
Yeah, recently you've been exposed to that with everything with your pandemic rules and regulations, and what he was doing privately came to light.
You mean having parties where they're all going out on the piss together?
Yeah. Because right after he signs a rule that you're not allowed to do that.
Whilst a lot of people didn't go to funerals of loved ones or whatever because they were following the rules. Yeah. So again, because I said that about him earlier during the stream in the chat, and it's the same thing really that should apply here. Leave partisan politics out of this, for a moment. Left and right, or be Republican, Democrat.
Exactly.
What you're dealing with here is a president that basically incited, basically broke the law. He's incited a riot. Same thing that goes with us with our situation with Boris. He's a sitting prime minister who broke the law. That's all there is to this.
Well, see, I live in Scotland, Claire.
I'd never have guessed.
Yeah, with I saw that your kinship with one of my good friends from the chat, Kyle's Goldfish, who I respect. It's great. But I think that all countries should have. I value all countries' opinion of this, because I've had to listen to the ridicule for 8 to 12 years of all of this, what's going on in our country, and I don't hide from it. I think any of you that know my friends that I speak about it privately, I'm not going to hide from it. I was embarrassed to prove.
Just two?
Yeah, just two.
Okay, finally.
Okay, you're a little loud. Do you want me to lower, or you want to lower? I'll do it. Okay, hold on. But yeah, it's just the volume just came up real high. There you go. Try that.
So when me living in Scotland, we think Boris Johnson's a muppet anyway. you know.
Well, you have to deal with it anyway. But you know, but I understand, and I think now you guys also understand. We all have embarrassments in politics that we have to deal with, and just as the individuals,
I mean,
to be able to talk to each other, you know, civilly.
Yeah.
You
I'll
know,
say
is
the only thing we don't have yet is we don't have an equivalent of Boba or Marjorie Taylor Greene quite yet. Although Nadine Dorris is pretty fucking dumb. So
right.
it's nowhere near as insane as that's about the only. That's the only
Listen,
bragging right we've got left though for America, quite frankly.
I know, is that you don't
And
have a green. This kind of. Well, I got to tell you though, she's special. But you know,
I even think she's a bit of a podo at times. A couple of videos I saw her put out recently, and I'm there looking at her thinking, you don't really believe the shit you're saying, you know. I'm just starting to get that impression of her now that even she knows what's coming out of her mouth is rubbish.
Yeah. No, I do. I agree. And Aaron, I agree, because I'm always open for open discourse, as long as they're not crapping on all of us, you know, based on what the country is doing. Like I wouldn't do to England or Scotland, anywhere, Australia, you know, we all have political differences.
You can crap on my area. I live right in the heart of Tory country, so you know.
Well, no, actually, I feel sorry for you, Dean. But actually, I'm not going to crap on
we
you.
actually kind of want the Scottish National Party to stand in England and just rescue us from our.
Okay, I can hear that. I can hear that. But you know, I agree. I agree. I have friends who live in the what we call the reddest part of the country, which they have to deal with some of the most outrageous politics and stuff there. As you know, narrow-mindedness, it becomes very difficult for many of them, and I listen to them too. We have differences here in our country. It's very, very divided. Right here in America, like we don't have to go looking for foreign countries to weigh in. Right here in America, we have plenty of discourse amongst each other. In my own family, it is divided so seriously that we had to, during the campaign, we had to have 2 separate holidays. I kid you not. That's how bad it was. Yeah. They couldn't even be in the same room because they couldn't have. We're a bunch of big talkers. You know, no kidding. You hear me, like you could imagine with me and the rest of my family's like all together. But we had to have 2 separate
how am I
holidays.
going? Oh, there we are.
There you are, Chris. Did you get to watch any of it on your phone?
Well, unfortunately, my phone decided it was too freaking hot in this house to work too.
Oh no! So all right. Well, you know the good thing is
it was only 95 outside. You know, no air, no fans.
I feel for
Bunch
you.
of hot, sweaty guys outside. I got to watch for a while, but
no, I feel sorry for our friend, the hot, sweaty guy. Like he's like working out there. You're like hot. I hope you're hydrating, dude. Yeah, I'm talking about you.
Now they freaking moved down the road, so I can't see him anymore. So,
well, you know,
the last thing I saw was
you could go out there and bring them a pitcher of ice water or something.
You really want to tempt me, don't you?
No, I don't. No, I don't. Actually, I want you to behave, and I want to wrap up on our commentary for today, and let everybody know that we'll be back on Wednesday morning. There are 7 scheduled that I saw on the government website hearings. This was hearing 2. There are up to 7 scheduled. They don't have the dates and times except for the 13th and the 16th. I don't have the time for the 16th, but the time for the next one. No, wait. Today was the 13th, right?
Yes, today's the 13th.
Yes,
all right. So then the
15th.
The 15th is at 10 a.m. and the 16th I don't have the time for. There is suspected to be one on Thursday also, which if it is, we will cover it. We're going to cover them all so that there's a record of it.
I mean, in a way, what we're sort of watching really is mainly sort of summaries today, isn't it? Because really a lot of the investigations, most of it, I think, is probably already been done from what I've heard. So a lot of this is summarising what they found.
Yes.
And this is unique for how our hearings are usually held. Would you agree, Quiz? They are usually much more boring than this and much more like
I will be
traditional.
honest. I am shocked that the committee went live at all.
But
They
they're
usually
doing
keep
it
things like
presentation
this
style.
quiet because they don't want everyone to know how close we came
How
to
close they
losing our
are,
country.
right? And what is actually involved in how far they'll
Right.
go. But as you can see by the presentations that are being done, the interviews that they are playing and the depositions, that was all done well ahead of time. And so they've pulled it all together for this committee purposely to inform the American people and the world what happened. The
This has
investigation's
nothing to
been going
do
on
with
for quite a
bringing.
while.
Yeah, this has nothing to do with bringing charges against the former president.
No, because we
This
can't
is
in
all
committee.
about
Right.
informing America just how, and you know, I would love to say that his quote unquote followers will sit down and think about this and look through this and go, oh my God, but they won't. They're going to do exactly what Trump tells them, and he's already told them it's all a bunch of lies. Don't listen to it. I mean, look at Fox News. Fox News will not run the coverage. They say there was no riot and blah, blah, blah. And during during Thursday nights, Fox News went 2 hours without running any commercials so they wouldn't lose any of their viewers. And I imagine they do the same today, and the same will go tomorrow or Wednesday and then Thursday. Fox News is just as corrupt about this as everyone else who was involved with it. I mean, this is how they got to be extra famous, is because they had the president who would call into their network weekly and do interviews.
And that's
but wouldn't
true.
grant interviews with anyone else.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Fox News is that shit, to be honest.
Oh, hold on.
That
No,
we
it's,
don't
it's
even
not
get it
gone.
here in Scotland. We're not.
Yeah.
It's been took off our TVs. It got took off our TV service. Again, maybe 5 to 10 years ago. Fox News is just the only American channel that I can get through my cable and stuff is CNN. Other than that, every other channel I have to go online to look at it online, because we used to have Fox News here, but then it disappeared, and I think it was because of the rhetoric and that they were spreading at that time. And to me, it seems like nothing has changed.
No, it's not. We don't really have what we would call neutral news organizations anymore here in the United States. As you've seen actually on the socials with the media, the mass media, it's the same thing with what we call news organizations that televise here. Because even on cable, we've got like MSNBC, which is more leaning left, and then we've got, Fox News or what's that other one, American whatever.
Well, we've
that
got
is
ABC,
more
CBS, NBC.
right, and they're all talking heads for mass media syndicate. They're all a lot of them are Rupert. That's my word. I call it Rupert. For when they're just towing the party line, they're not even pulling stuff off the AP reasonable.
Right.
It's all twisted. Like the AP will come out with a title, the American, the Associated Press, and then it gets all twisted into something else.
I actually think the result of the American election, and that there's something British politicians really need to seriously learn from, not just the result of the American election, but the recent election in Australia, that you don't have to suck up to Murdoch and be Murdoch's favourite to win an election. And I wish that our politicians would learn that, because I mean, Murdoch threw everything, but I mean, he threw everything behind Trump. Fox News. And I mean, I saw something a little while ago. So they just talk about when they called Arizona. Apparently, Trump went bloody mad when that happened.
He sure did. He sure did.
But they also became one of the first ones who were backing Trump on the on the stolen election narrative, and and
right up until the point that they got sued.
Yeah, well, but look at that. Is he still with Fox now? Now that bloody what's his name? Tucker Carlson. He's still with them.
Oh God, he's still there.
Tucker's
He's the biggest
still
moneymaker.
He is. He's like, yeah. But I mean, he's making been making documentaries about like the 6th of January, just trying to, you know, totally make excuses for what, you know, for it, shift the blame away from where
Right.
it's supposed to be. So, you know.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, after I think this really started to occur around the time of the Vietnam War, and then it really went heavy after Nixon's Watergate, is we no longer are seeing news anchors who read the news and report the news, because that's all they used to do. Now they editorialize the news. Now they tell us what they think or what their company wants them to say, and so on. And it would be really nice if we could just go back to having somebody sitting there reading the news and just moving from story to story, and that would be nice. It would,
or at least if you're going to have some commentary, make, you know, a bit of balance, so there's pushback from different sides of it, which is what, you know, you kind of want, isn't it? I mean, sadly, I've noticed it's a thing that's sadly creeping into some of our news channels as well over here. I mean, you got the BBC, it's not too bad. Sky News is not too bad, but then we've got these news stations like GB News and so on popping up, which is very, very partisan.
No, I don't.
And what they call fair and balanced means that they have a person who supports their position, and then they bring in a person who might kind of lean the other way, but he's not really going to get hard on about it, and he's not going to press anybody else about it. I mean, it's like, I mean, you watch that on the channels we have, you know, that you can go to any channel and they'll have somebody from the left, somebody from the right, and yet if they're a left-leaning station, the person from the left is super left, and the person from the right is kind of like meek and mild, and he rarely talks what he wants to say, and if he tries to say anything, they jump down his throat, and it's like, okay, can we just get back to news? I'd like to hear the news of the morning.
Yeah, no, I just don't trust mainstream media at all anymore. I've got my own channel, and it's about wrongful convictions. And I've got I'm doing a case here just now. It's a wrongful conviction in the UK, and it's of Luke Mitchell. He was 14 years old, and he was convicted of murdering his 14-year-old girlfriend, Jodie Jones, in 2003. But there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever to connect Luke to the crime, the scene, or anything like that at all. And that poor lad got vilified through the media. I mean, he was 14 years old, and he was named in the papers. Jodie was killed on the 30th of June, and that wee laddie's name was in the media, the mainstream media, and being printed and everything like that on the 3rd of July.
Yeah, he's a minor. That should never happen to a minor.
Exactly.
Somebody who's not been convicted.
Don't know what I don't know what American newspapers are like on the whole. But it used to at least be the case that with our TV stations, at least, they used to be at least somewhat balanced, whatever. And it's our newspapers have been notorious. The mainstream newspapers, like, have been notoriously bad in Britain for decades. But you know, with maybe one or two exceptions, possibly, but most of them are bad.
Well, several things happened here to change it. I can be honest with you. First, let me just say, Autistic Shell has a question for us. Could Fox News be held accountable? Quiz, I don't think so, right? And basically, because of what I'm going to say next, which
once they, and here's the deal about Fox News being held accountable. Once they had literally gone out on the limb, allowing Tucker Carlson to do his bullshitting. But once the voting system, Smart and Dominion, filed lawsuits on them,
they all stopped. But there was
told
litigation.
them, you know, we'll take $3 billion of your money. Thank you very much.
Stop it.
Tucker Carlson came out and said, or no, it was the VP who is Tucker Carlson's boss, that came out and said, why would you even listen or believe Tucker Carlson? He's not even news, he's entertainment. And yet, even though he said that, people continue to listen to Tucker Carlson. But that's how they get around it.
But that's how they're getting around it, because here in the United States years ago, they took all the restrictions off the FCC to regulate content on what was news and what was entertainment. In other words, it used to be the Walter Cronkite days. I don't know if you remember. Quiz, you're much younger than I am. Probably I'm just like, it's even before my time.
I only know Walter Cronkite by YouTube clips. So
right,
I know of Cronkite.
Right. That's me too. I know of him. I'm not gonna, I'm not ancient people, but like I know of him. And he was a solid reporter, and he set the standard, like many of them, to reporting just the facts, not weigh in with your opinion or this and that, just like black and white, okay, the facts. And that's what news used to be. And there used to be regulations that kept it that way if you were going to call yourself a news organization and blah, blah, blah. But there's been a stripping of those regulations like I don't know what since the internet. And now, as long as they categorize themselves certain ways as entertainment, whether they're coming out and saying they're a news organization or not, they can say whatever they want. Now, the only thing that keeps them in check is litigation, because we're a litigious country.
Right.
It seems like we're capital. We run by money and lawyers. Okay,
and that's why you no longer hear Tucker Carlson talking about the Dominion or the smart voter machines.
Right, because he doesn't want to get sued. Right, because they're
already getting sued. He just doesn't. I mean, if he continues to talk about it, he's just giving them more and more ammunition. So.
Oh, they have enough. I mean, they got the other one. They're going to get them. I mean, Dominion is in the right. There was no evidence for what any of these people said. No evidence at all. And there were actually real investigations that proved it wasn't true. And they're going to be able to use all of it in a court of law to murderize these people in court and make them pay. And I'm glad to see it, because people need to be held accountable for, I believe in public relations, but I would like a little bit of truth in it, not bold-faced lies, to convince people of absolutely. And I know I have rose-colored glasses when it comes to politics. I really do think misinformation should be punishable, because to me, you're really doing a disservice to the American people. When you're trying to sway them without accurate information, you're starting out wrong to begin with. And I know you want to win, and I know it's a game, and politics is this whole big thing, and little old bear shouldn't be messing in this kind of shit. But it's true. I mean, when you start out that way, it's just gonna go wrong. Like, can't you start out with the truth? I mean, can't you stand behind what you actually believe instead of like what you think we want to hear? Like, I want to hear the truth. Whatever it is.
Yeah, well, I mean, we all want to hear the truth, don't we? I mean, here in the UK, our media and like our TV shows and things like that, there is a body out there that if you don't like something, that you can go and you can report it. It's called Ofgem, if I remember right, or Ofcom. Ofcom, yeah, godless, yeah, Ofcom. And if there is something said by media, or there's a TV show that comes on, people can actually phone and complain about the content of what the media has put out, or the content of the program that has been put out. And if they get enough complaints, then they get in touch with the company and they tell them that they either have to rectify it, make an apology, or ban it altogether, So, I mean, we do have that we can fall back on. But if the papers, like the news organizations and that, they can say what they bloody want and nothing happens to them, know.
Well, that brings up... There's another issue that we're having in America, and I'm sure you have it in Europe now, is you're getting politicians, and I'll mention a certain state senator out of Nebraska who once in the legislature stood up and said, we've got a big problem in our primary schools, and that they've started to allow furries, and they've started to put litter boxes in so kids can act like cats and dogs, and that's where they do their business. Now, did this man know that this was bullshit? No, he didn't. He actually believed this crap. What he didn't do is actually check the story, because you get a cross between two stories. The reason they have kitty litter in schools today is just to cover up blood. And that's it. They stock kitty litter to cover up the blood in our schools. But then they had a story about kids playing as cats and dogs, and and then they mixed them, and then this guy gets a hold of it, and he speaks it out in front of the legislature. And he's not the only person who's done this. We've had people go in front of city council meetings and do this. And it's like, geez, could you just at least verify your story before you go out and complain about something?
Yeah. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, especially with us when it comes to the mainstream media, and the prime example is just take the Depp and her case. Everybody's saying that she won in the UK and everything like that. No, she bloody didn't, because she was not a party to that case. It was the person, Dan Wooten, who wrote the article.
It was the Sun newspaper that was.
It was a libel case. It wasn't a proof of abuse case. And they don't even admit how different it is there, that it wasn't a jury. It was a judge who got away in the statements with no evidence to support them. Her evidence was just her words. And they're trying to make it like there was actual evidence submitted. I'd like to see it. I followed that case. I didn't see it.
I'm gonna be honest, because I must be one of the few people that's not followed this. I actually actively stayed away from anything to do with that case. I really did. But I mean, I don't know. I'm not familiar with the UK case, but I was going to bring up one of the things that is a real issue. Actually, it's supposed to. I think. No, actually, hold on. I mean, if I get this right, one of the things that is a bit more helpful in the UK is if we can. If you can take a publication to court over a libel, the burden of proof is actually on them to prove that they didn't libel you. Where I think in the United States, or if you're
it's the other way around.
It's the other way around.
Right. So actually, that's how Amber ended up as a witness in the UK. They needed her to testify why.
Now I don't know how the Sun newspaper won that. I really don't. But
I do. I can explain it based on the judge's own statements, because in the UK, he is allowed to take her verbal testimony as to why the Sun would say what they said, and that's all they had to prove, is that the Sun had reasonable understanding that what she said might have been true. Here she was saying it publicly, saying it repeatedly. She had filed a TRO. He then took her verbal statement and said, I am going to add weight to this by saying, I believe you. And that's all the judge needed. That's all he was required to do. He went through a tribunal. I believe in your country, when they have tried to appeal, there was a tribunal where 3 judges sat up there, went over everything that judge did to see if Johnny had an appeal based on what the judge did, and said, no, it is up to the judge solely to decide whether to take the testimony of a witness at word. And he did, period, done, over, no contesting. And that was how the whole thing laid out. Yeah.
Yeah, but the other thing to that as well, though, Claire, is she didn't have to hand over her phone, text messages, emails,
no
anything
evidence
like that, because she was a third party. Yeah, she was a third party, so she wasn't open to the disclosure. We call it disclosure, you call it discovery. She wasn't liable under the discovery law in that claim. So all the Sun did was took her word for it. But that's what I was saying earlier. It's harder to sue or get anything out of the media on a liable case. It took the royal family 25 years
Right.
to find out that the BBC had lied to Princess Diana's brother. I mean, they forged documents and everything like that, and showed them to Diana's brother and says, look, all these other papers and that are going to run with us, and we'd like to do it and get the story and that out there, you know, any chance you could get her to talk to us. And so they went round a manipulated way of getting the 1995 interview, where that's the famous interview where she says that there's three of them in the marriage.
That's the Bashir interview, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. And everything like that. But the royal family were saying, look, she was coerced sort of to do that and falsifying documents and things like that. And it was only a couple of years ago that they actually found out, and they actually came out and admitted it, you know, and that was 25 years after Diana had passed away, that all this is came out, you know. So, I mean, to try and take an organization like that to court here in the UK is highly impossible sometimes, you know, because they can say whatever they want. They called Johnny a wife beater on her word, you know. And I've put out a few tweets to the Sun and to Dan Wooten and everything like that, saying, where is your headline now that Amber Heard is an abuser?
Well, I mean,
you know, you were quick enough at jumping on the bandwagon when it came to Johnny.
But that's still
the Sun newspaper is.
They're doubling down.
For those who are not familiar with the Sun newspaper, it is one of the absolute vilest rags of a newspaper in the world.
It's the American equivalent of a National Enquirer, like the ones we find in the supermarket in the at the checkout.
But it's a bit more insidious than that.
It's
though.
a gossip. It's a gossip rag. Yeah, it's a gossip rag. It's a salacious gossip rag.
The famous one that they did was that they're reporting on. There's one city in the UK that the Sun newspaper is not sold in, and that's Liverpool. And that's because of the Hillsborough Stadium disaster, and which was a soccer match. There was issues with the TLDR version of it. The police did not handle the crowd well. They messed up big time. 96 people died.
And there was the crushing injuries.
But the Sun newspaper ran a disgusting headline on that, effectively blaming the Liverpool fans just because they were trying to suck up to the police, and it was and there was some really disgusting things being.
Just to bring this all back around,
let's
where we're supposed to be is talking about will Fox be held liable, and the answer is no.
Yes, autistic. That's your answer.
Because one, they apologized on air. One, they declared that Joseph R. Biden was the president after all their crap, and now they're being sued by Dominion and Smart. So
they're
walking a very, very fine line. Even though Tucker's kind of gotten off on the path again, you can bet that there are people that are sitting there watching him very carefully. And if he says anything that goes outside the lines of what he should be saying, they'll smack him down again. I mean, eventually Tucker's going to do the I'm so big for this network that you can't silence me, and he's going to find out the hard way that he can be silenced and silenced fast.
Plenty of them have, but on that, I just want to say thank you to everybody who weighed in the chat with your opinions, and it's much more interesting and for me much more entertaining and palatable to do this with the crowd because I wasn't yelling at the TV the whole time. It was actually enjoyable. They are going to have another hearing on Wednesday morning, and I will be streaming. I'll be streaming all of them, so it's a complete set for anybody who can't be here and want to run the recap, because I don't know how much they're going to keep them up, how long they'll keep them up. They get documented, and everything like that. But I hope you'll all join me. Everyone's welcome to their opinion from every country. Like I said, as long as you're respectful and you don't blame all of us Americans for these crap, I'm cool. I'm cool. You can come say what you want. But the same as I would give to, you know, all respectful opinions, including in my own country, which we are red and we are blue and we are Democrats and we are Republicans and we are pro and con on many, many issues. I'll always open it up for honest discourse. If you're respectful, we'll hear you. We'll definitely hear you. Yep. You just yell at us instead. I hope I'm not yelling at you, Turtles. I do get on a soapbox, but it's never at you all. Okay, it's usually at an issue. Let's be clear. Never is it at you all, unless you come in here and start, disparaging people who have given their lives for service. I get a little angry about that, and I did kind of take that out on somebody. But there was an individual event. It's usually not the masses, so I don't know. But does anybody have any last words? I'm going to start with you, Quiz, because you weren't here. You got
I just want to apologize for for the guys who decided they had to cut my power. I mean,
you want to well, you know what? It was mostly while we wouldn't have been talking anyway. So it really was.
That's true.
It was you and I just would have been making insults to each other in the private chat. I mean, that's all right.
Well, they're still out there working, so golly gee. Guess I'll have something to do this afternoon.
Well, yeah, bring them some water. If you're going to be staring at them sweating, bring them some water, please. Like, do the right thing, It's like,
does that just involve water only as doing the right thing, or?
Yeah, Chris. What do I expect, right? Alice, do you have any final words?
No, just thank you for having me on the panel. I'm glad that you're streaming this, because the only way I would be able to see it is through CNN, and we know how the media can be about cutting it up and things like that. So I'm really thankful that you're actually streaming it, and I'd love to join you again.
I'll be here Wednesday. You're welcome anytime. And how about you, Jeff? Well, thank you so much for joining me and stepping up and coming on up.
I mean, I was going to say, as an outsider, I found this quite interesting. Yeah, I have watched a couple of hearings before, and I definitely picked up that this is a bit different now. They're being a bit more concise and to the point with these. So I suppose that is in a sense for a sort of TV audience to a degree. It's quite interesting to hear. It is not looking very good for Trump and Giuliani. I'll say that they're not coming out. They are definitely not coming out of this looking good at all. Now, what will actually happen as a result of this? I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't like to make a prediction, but
yeah, you want to? You can wait till the next one. We're halfway through and we can lay odds, see what happens. But actually, the committee cannot actually go forward with anything. They're just presenting what the investigation found, and it will be up to our government, our actual legal officials. The Department of Justice is going to have to take it from there, and they have to weigh it out as to what's prosecutable and whether it'll be in the means. When they spend our money, they have to make sure that it's not going to be, it's going to be for the best of the country to do it. And that might be the issue there. To prosecute an ex-president is a big thing in this country, a huge thing.
It will be a huge thing.
It'll be a huge thing. And so I can understand why they're being so cautious and why they changed the way the format is being done. They want to get the information out there. But they have no control over the outcome. But I'm happy to have the information out there. I want the truth, and I'm glad they're doing it. So
I do think this is, in this instance, they really do need to seriously consider it. If the findings are really that bad, which they, from what we're seeing so far, they look like they're really, really bad for Trump and.
When he's gotten away with so much, even while he was talking like this, and I'll talk more about this on Wednesday, but I mentioned it once in the chat. While he was acting so unstable and they were giving him the right information and he was still disregarding everything they said, we do have vehicles in the United States that they, legal methods that they could have used to remove him. But
and they were thinking about it.
And they were thinking about it, but because it was
they
so
almost
close
enacted
to him being out
the 25th.
The 25th, and that would have put Prince Pence in charge until the inauguration, and that might have gone better as far as prosecutions and things like that. It would have probably saved us a lot of money
Well,
because we've had
actually,
years
I think it
of
would have pissed off
investigation.
everyone.
Yeah, but he was. I mean, look, listen to the
Well,
testimony. His own people are saying.
yeah.
I heard Barr say. Did Barr say delusional today?
Oh, yeah.
I
He said
heard the
it's
word
bullshit
delusional.
as usual.
Yeah, and he said delusional, like he was not listening. He was acting,
Yeah.
and those are scary words to hear somebody talk about a president. I'm just saying, look, but we'll talk about that more on Wednesday. Let's wrap up.
Right.
Thank you all. And I've got a super chat here from Autistic Shield. A super sticker says you're number one, and it's even got a wink and some hearts. Thank you very much, Autistic. Yeah, they still do need to Article 3 him, Aaron. I agree. Let's talk more about that. Come join me Wednesday and explain that to people. Because our laws are, it's really hard to get rid of anybody in our country. Anybody. It really is.
Yep.
It really is. It doesn't matter what they do. I mean, really, he had made a blatant statement at one time when he was running for president. He said, I could walk down the street and shoot somebody like right out in front and you'd still vote me in. And he was right. That's how crazy he whipped everybody up. It didn't matter if he committed murder. They were going to go with him. And that's sad. But it's a chilling statement to repeat now. But it was part of his campaign rhetoric. And we have to live with that. But anyway, so thank you all. I'm going to put my outro
We'll
on.
see you guys on Wednesday. And I promise I'll
Wednesday
be here.
morning, I have the stream up already. And hopefully you can join me. And anyone else, I will be dropping the link. Don't be shy. You're all welcome.
I might be listening in. So I don't know if I'll be able to actually join, but I'll
that's
certainly
okay.
be listening in.
I'm so glad that so many of you are into it. So do me a favor. If you have a Twitter or my stream is already up on the channel, spread it out. Let's get more people involved because the more people that hear about this, the better. Not even just from me, but all throughout the news. I want more people to know about what's going on with this. That as Americans, we're actually trying to get the real information out there. We're actually trying because I think it's disheartening when so many of my fellow countrymen and other people are so disheartened that we're not doing anything. So I want to promote that we are actually trying to get the right information out there and support it the best that we can. So even if you don't support my channel doing it, support a channel doing it, anybody you want. But let's get the right information out there. And if you want to hang in the chat, get more people here. That's cool too. I mean, I'm not opposed to it. I'm a freaking YouTuber. But, so on that, I'm going to close. But thank you again, panel. Thank you, Alice. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Quiz. Thank you so much. And I got to tell you, I got to give Quiz great credit for this because, he is one of the few people I could talk politics out without my head falling off my shoulders. And he actually motivated me to do this. And I thank him for it because I'm really happy to be doing it. Oh, stop. Okay, let's go. Go play with your workers. I'll see y'all later. Tomorrow we'll be doing Marilyn Manson. I haven't put the stream up yet, but it will be earlier in the day for several of you from all over the world that have asked me to do it after midnight, which would be nice. And I heard you. Since I'm moving it, I'll move this one for you early so you can catch it. Okay. And I'll talk to you all later. All right. On that, good night, everybody. Good night.
Right.